Hi guys, and welcome to Quiet History Vault. Tonight we step into the damp dawn of a Missouri river town where the air smells of mud, wood smoke, bacon grease, and the nervous sweat of people pretending they're about to begin an adventure instead of a very long argument with weather hunger and their own feet. The wagons wait by the water with their white covers glowing softly in the early light, and everything around you feels busy, hopeful, and just a little doomed. You can hear oxen snorting, children fussing, men boasting, and barrels thumping onto planks that groan under the weight. It all looks brave from a distance. Up close it looks like a moving yard sale with livestock. And yes, you probably will not survive this in quite the sturdy, cheerful way the guidebooks imply. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you settle in, post your location and local time. Now, dim the lights, you stand near the riverbank and try to imagine what West means. Not as a word on a map, not as a speech from a politician, not as a rumour passed around a store counter, but as a place your own legs must carry you toward one dusty mile at a time. The Oregon Trail does not begin with noble music and cinematic sunrise. It begins with wet boots, shouting teamsters, and the smell of animals who have no interest in your dreams. Around you, independents and nearby jumping-off towns are swollen with motion. In the 1840s and 1850s, thousands of emigrants really did gather in Missouri each spring to begin the journey to Murdoch West, waiting for grass to grow enough for their livestock before setting off. That is one of the plain, sturdy facts of the trail. Leave too early and your oxen weaken. Leave too late and winter waits for you in the mountains like a clerk closing a shop door in your face. So everyone hovers in this awkward season of mud and hope trying to time a continent. You are not alone, though. Privacy is already becoming a fond memory. Families cluster around stacks of flour sacks, bacon barrels, seed packets, spare axles, cast iron pots, and things no one can quite justify, but no one can quite leave behind. A rocking chair, a mirror, a Bible wrapped in cloth, a tiny china shepherdess that survives 3 generations and one rough crossing before finally meeting a wagon wheel. Every object seems to carry a vote in the argument between practicality and sentiment. Sentiment is losing, though not gracefully. A man near you insists his wagon can hold one more chest. His wife gives him a look that says she knows exactly how this will end. Another family strips down their load in public, laying out possessions in the dirt while passers-by inspect the pile, like crows considering bright scraps. You begin to understand something quietly humiliating about the trail. It forces decisions. Not abstract decisions, but decisions with weight. Literally weight. A shawl, a skillet, an heirloom, a quilt. What matters enough to drag across a continent? The wagon itself is not the grand rolling home people later imagine. Most emigrant wagons are work wagons, usually lighter farm wagons adapted for the journey, not the giant ornate coaches of steam plays. You look at one closely and realise how small it truly is. Its canvas cover suggests shelter, but only in the friendliest possible interpretation of that word. It offers shade, some rain protection, and an illusion of order. What it does not offer is comfort. Walking daily will be your real occupation. The wagon is for goods for children when they are ill, for the elderly if there is space, and for the injured if luck has already gone elsewhere. The oxen stand patient and enormous with the resigned expression of creatures who know humans are planning something tiresome. Horses look prettier, mules look cleverer, but oxen were often preferred because they were cheaper, steadier, and less likely to be stolen. That practical choice tells you a great deal about the trail. Glamour is almost never the winning strategy. Stubbornness is. A fiddler starts playing somewhere behind the line of wagons, and for a moment the whole riverfront softens. The notes drift across the crowd with the smell of coffee and frying salt pork. Someone laughs. Someone cries quietly into a handkerchief. Someone swears they heard Oregon. Soil is so rich you can drop a stick in the ground and wake to find a chair, a fence post, and a table. That sort of talk moves fast in these towns. One quirky tidbit from the era is that guidebooks and word of mouth sometimes made Oregon sound nearly magical, a place where crops flourished with barely any effort and hard winters belonged to somebody else. Brochures were not quite modern real estate ads, but they were certainly related in spirit. You walk past a blacksmith shop where wheels are being tightened and iron rims checked. The ringing sound of hammer on metal cuts through everything else. Sparks jump in the dim interior, bright as fireflies. A child nearby sleeps on a pile of folded bedding, somehow immune to the clamour. You envy that child already. Adults on the trail carry tomorrow in their minds like a stone in a pocket. Children can still nap beside a hammer. Not everyone here is heading west for the same reason. Some dream of farmland in the Willamette Valley. Some want a fresh start after debt or loss. Some are swept along by family ambition. Some simply cannot bear being left behind while neighbours chase a future that sounds larger than their own. Historians still argue whether the strongest motive was opportunity, religious conviction, economic pressure, or the contagious force of migration itself, because human beings rarely pack up their whole lives for one neat reason. It is usually a braid of hopes, fears, pride, and timing. A preacher offers blessings to anyone who wants one. A merchant offers more bacon at an outrageous price to anyone who still has cash. The preacher promises eternal guidance. The merchant promises practical survival. In a few weeks you may decide the merchant was the more immediately useful theologian. The river keeps sliding past brown and indifferent. Steamboats whistle, crates shift, chickens protest from wicker cages. The whole place sounds like a threshold. Once you leave, there will be no quick errand back to town, no simple correction, no cheerful little reset. Forgot medicine? Too bad. Packed too many books? Also too bad. Chose the wrong boots. Your feet will write you a long complaint. You begin to notice the ground itself under your shoes. This is fitting because walking is the hidden truth of the Oregon Trail. Popular imagination loves the wagon, but daily life means walking beside it, guiding animals, lifting wheels from ruts, fording streams, gathering fuel, chasing loose livestock, and arriving in camp already worn thin. You do not ride nobly into the sunset. You trudge next to your possessions while dust climbs your skirts or your trouser cuffs and settles into your socks with malicious intimacy. Before departure, there is a final flurry of adjustments. Flour is repacked into smaller sacks. Bacon is checked for spoilage. Water casks are examined. Gunpowder is discussed in lowered voices. A woman quietly sews coins into a hem. Another family trades a heavy bureau for extra rope and a second yoke chain. The town teaches its last lesson before the prairie does. Wait is fate. As evening comes, the light turns honey-coloured on the wagon covers, and the noise gentles into pockets of conversation. You sit or stand or lean, listening to people rehearse confidence for one another. They speak of fertile valleys, timber, fresh starts, and roomy skies. They do not speak as much about cholera, broken axles, drowning sore feet, or the long ache of missing everyone you did not bring. Yet those unspoken things hover nearby all the same like mist over the river. Somewhere a baby fusses, then settles. Ox bells clink softly. Boots scrape. A pot lid rattles. You feel the town easing toward night, though sleep does not come easily when tomorrow has such large intentions. The river smells cool now, and the mud holds the memory of the day's heat. You look west once more into darkness you cannot read, and you understand that the trail is not a road in the modern sense. It is a decision stretched across 2,000 miles, and by morning you will start walking inside it. Morning arrives without ceremony. No triumphant horns, no grand declaration, just a pale sky over the river town and a chorus of practical noises. Rope pulled through rough hands, oxen shifting their weight with deep, patient breaths, tin cups knocking against one another. Somebody coughing in the cool dawn, somebody else already irritated, which feels impressively efficient this early in the day. You wake to the smell of damp canvas and ashes from last night's fire, and before the sun has properly cleared the horizon, The business of packing your entire world begins in earnest. This is the part no one romanticizes properly. People love the notion of leaving everything behind, but first you have to decide exactly what everything is, and then you have to fit it into a wagon that seems to shrink whenever you look at it too honestly. The white cover arches overhead like a promise, but the wagon bed below is blunt and finite. You stand beside it holding one useful item after another, and discover that your future is now being negotiated by volume weight and the opinions of several tired relatives. A typical emigrant family often carried hundreds of pounds of flour along with bacon, beans, coffee, sugar, salt, and dried fruit if they could afford it. That is one of the plain historical truths of trail preparation. Food mattered more than almost anything else because out on the plains you could not stroll into a shop for fresh supplies every few miles. You had to think in months, not meals. Flour sacks are lifted with grunts and arranged low for balance. Bacon barrels are wedged into corners. Coffee is treated with a reverence usually reserved for relics. You can already tell that a warm cup of it on a cold morning will feel less like a beverage and more like a spiritual event. The wagon smells of pine boards, old iron canvas, and animal grease. Your hands pick up every texture at once, the coarse weave of sacks, the slick curve of a metal kettle, the splintery handle of an axe, a folded quilt that still carries the faint soap scent of home. That last one slows you down. Home is dangerous now, not because it harms you, but because it clings. Every familiar object asks to come along. Every family member becomes a lawyer arguing for one treasured possession. A woman nearby insisted on bringing a feather bed. A man laughs until he has to help lift it. Laughter fades quickly when weight becomes physical. The trail has a savage talent for turning sentiment into arithmetic. A spare skillet may save your supper. A decorative chest may ruin an axle. A family Bible earns its place because it can be read, held, and wept over. A clock less so unless someone feels very strongly about knowing the exact minute misery arrives. You watch as people sort belongings into silent categories. Necessary, very necessary, facey. Painful to leave, impossible to justify. The piles in the dirt tell the real story of migration more clearly than any noble speech. Extra chairs, trunks, framed pictures, bolts of fabric, a set of china too fine for prairie life books, heavier than their owners remembered. One family gives up a cast iron stove, another abandons a spinning wheel. The objects sit there in the morning light like little monuments to ordinary lives interrupted. There is also the matter of tools, because reaching Oregon means very little if you arrive unable to build mend-cut plant or defend anything. Axes, shovels, chains, spare wagon tongues, tar buckets, wheel grease, rifles, lead-shot fish hooks, harness needles and coils of rope. All claim room. So do medicines, though. The word medicine can be generous. Laudanum, quinine, calomel, castor oil, homemade salves, dried herbs, bandages, and hope. Quite a lot of 19th century medical planning seems to rest on the assumption that if a substance tastes terrible, it must be doing something useful. One odd little tidbit from trail lore is that emigrants sometimes packed luxuries that are so specific and personal that later readers can only blink at them. There are accounts of families carrying pickles, preserves, even musical instruments, because a harsh journey still leaves room for cravings and vanity. Human beings will haul absurd things into hardship if those things remind them who they were before the hardship started. It is oddly comforting, also wildly inconvenient. You begin to learn how carefully a wagon must be loaded. Heavy goods low, frequently used items where they can be reached. Bedding rolled tight, cooking tools near the back, water containers secure, rifles away from curious children, which is sensible in every century. There is a craft to this, and veteran advisors in town speak with the stern confidence of people who have seen too many amateurs make a disaster of it. One bag placed badly can upset balance. One poorly tied crate can shift on a rough slope. One unnecessary item can become the reason the oxen strain harder in summer heat. No pressure. The animals are part of the calculation too. Oxen are not machines, however much people speak of them in terms of mileage and endurance. They need feed, rest, water, patience, and handling that is more skill than force. You hear teamsters muttering commands in steady tones guiding yokes into place-checking bows and chains. Leather creaks, hooves scuff the ground, flies already gather at the corners of eyes and along damp hides. You watch one ox turn its broad head and blink as though mildly insulted by the entire enterprise. Fair enough. A child appears with a doll tucked under one arm and asks whether the doll counts as cargo. No one answers quickly. That hesitation says everything. Even the smallest possession is now part of a larger question. What do you need to remain yourself? What can be left in the name of survival? Adults answer with numbers and experience. Children answer with attachment. Honestly, the children may have the more accurate method, though not the more practical one. There are guidebooks, of course. America in the 19th century loves a handbook nearly as much as it loves optimism. Printed advice circulates freely, telling families what to carry, when to leave, what roads to follow, what hazards to expect. Some of it is useful. Some of it has the dreamy confidence of a man who has crossed one river successfully and now considers himself an oracle. Historians still dispute how closely emigrants followed these manuals in reality, because preparation varied wildly by class, region, experience and personality. Some families were meticulous planners. Others seem to have packed by intuition and panic. You can tell which is which at a glance. The meticulous ones have neat lists, tied bundles labelled "containers, a place for everything." The panicked ones have an extra skillet, 3 random sacks are missing all, and a grandmother refusing to surrender a side table. The trail will equalise them eventually, but for now the contrast is almost comic. By midday the town feels hotter, louder and more crowded. Sunlight glances off wagon hoops and barrel tops. Dust begins to mix with the river damp and create that special kind of grime that settles on your skin and immediately feels permanent. You wipe your hands on your clothes and make them worse. A merchant strolls by with the expression of a man who knows urgency is profitable. Prices rise in these jumping-off places because everyone needs one more thing: rope, salt, beans, nails, hope, if it came in a sack. A quiet sadness lingers beneath the bustle. Packing for the trail is not simply organising supplies, it is a rehearsal for leaving a life. Every folded quilt, every carefully wrapped cup, every discarded chair contains an admission that the old house, the old routine, the old certainty may already belong to the past. You hear this in the pauses between conversation, in the way someone touches a trunk lid before closing it, in the way a woman smooths a child's hair while staring at nothing, in the way men suddenly care very much about rope knots because they would rather discuss knots than fear. By evening the wagon finally looks full, though no one trusts fullness. There will be rearranging tomorrow and the day after that, and probably whenever a wheel hits a rut hard enough to throw common sense into a ditch. Still, this first arrangement matters. It is your household translated into motion. Not elegant, not spacious, but possible. The sky goes gold again, and the packed wagon sits in that light like a rough little ship waiting to launch onto grass instead of water. Inside are your meals, your blankets, your tools, your keepsakes, your future aches, and perhaps the last objects you will still own months from now. You place one final bundle where it fits, step back and feel the strange hush that follows hard preparation. The world has not changed yet. The road has not begun in full, but your life is already stacked, tied down and braced for jostling. The first real miles feel almost disappointingly ordinary. After all the freighted emotion of departure, all the grand talk about destiny, all the anxious loading and reloading, the beginning of the journey arrives as a line of wagons moving with stubborn slowness through open country while you walk beside them and try not to think too far ahead. The oxen lean into their yokes. Wheels creak with a rhythm that will soon become the background music of your entire existence. Harness chains clink. Dust lifts from the road in soft clouds and settles onto hems, cuffs, whiskers, and breakfast alike. West, it turns out, begins with a very long plod. You discover quickly that the wagon is not really your seat, but your companion. It rolls nearby like a lumbering relative always present, never especially comfortable, and somehow taking up more emotional space than its size should allow. Popular memory later likes to place emigrants heroically perched inside, gazing nobly toward the horizon. In reality, many people walked much of the way to spare the animals and make room for supplies. That is one of the clearest facts about trail life, and your feet learn it before your mind does. You walk because the wagon is loaded. You walk because the oxen are working. You walk because there is no practical alternative. The trail is a pedestrian experience with occasional seating. Morning coolness helps at first. The grass is silvered with dew and the light lies gently over the fields as though trying to be encouraging. Birdsong flickers in the hedgerows. A dog trots under a wagon and then darts out again, thrilled by the moving world. Somebody up ahead starts singing a hymn in a voice not quite awake yet. A child asks how far Oregon is and receives a reply so vague it can only be described as philosophical. Far enough, little one. Far enough. The first thing you notice is pace, or perhaps lack of it. This is not travel in the modern sense where motion itself gives a little thrill. It is a working speed, a practical speed, the speed of heavy wagons and live animals and uneven ground. 2 miles an hour can feel both patient and relentless. There is no dramatic rush, just steady repetition. Step dust wheel breath, step dust wheel breath. A person could become very poetic about it, but mainly your ankles become opinionated. The road is not truly a road at all, not as you would understand one now. It is a broad, worn route shaped by use season and improvisation. Ruts appear where wagons have passed before. Mud pockets remain in low places. Stones jut out where the earth thins. Sometimes the track widens into several parallel paths as travellers choose slightly better ground to either side, which gives the land a braided look, as though many doubts have been pressed into the prairie at once. Each lane seems to say the same thing in a slightly different tone. Perhaps this way will be easier. It rarely is. You fall into company because there is very little choice. The people who seemed merely adjacent in town are now unavoidably part of your daily orbit. You hear their voices hour after hour. You learn who coughs, who whistles, who scolds children, in clipped little bursts, who pretends to know directions and who complains about oxen, as though the oxen personally conspired against them. Trail companionship is intimate in the least glamorous way possible. These people will know what you eat, how you walk, how often you lose your temper and whether you snore. Civilization has peeled away a layer of privacy and tossed it into the nearest rut. Conversation rises and falls with the road. In easier stretches, people talk of land claims, orchards and the beautiful forests said to wait in Oregon. In rougher patches, there is less imagination available. You hear more immediate language then. Lift that. Hold the line. Mind the wheel. Keep the cow from straying. Where is the water bucket? The trail has a lovely talent for reducing dreams into verbs. One quirky little detail that surfaces in diaries and recollections is how often emigrants became obsessed with tiny annoyances. Not just the big dangers, but the itch of dust under collars, the way wagon grease smeared everything, the maddening persistence of burrs in hems and stockings. That feels believable almost at once. Great hardship is made up of countless small irritations marching in formation. Nobody builds a legend around burrs, but burrs still ruin your afternoon. As the sun climbs, the road changes character. Dew dries off the grass and the softness of morning burns away. Dust thickens. The smell of animals grows stronger in the heat, warm and musky, and not entirely welcome. Leather harnesses warm under the sun and release that rich, oily scent of worked hide. Your own body joins the mixture soon enough. Sweat under wool or cotton is its own weather. You shift your shoulders, adjust your hat, and keep walking. There is a subtle hierarchy to the wagon train, though it is still early enough for everyone to pretend otherwise. People with experience move more calmly. They conserve motion, words, and panic. Those with less experience expend all three too freely. A man with a new hat and a strong opinion tries to advise everyone within earshot. By noon he has already tied and retied something 3 times. Another traveller, older and quieter, says almost nothing and fixes a loose trace in half the time. The road sorts performance from competence rather efficiently. You begin to understand the animals as individuals too. One ox pulls with serene determination, another pauses whenever it thinks the universe has become unreasonable, which is often. A mule farther back in the line turns its head with such expressive contempt that you almost admire it. Animals decide much of your day because their energy, health, and mood shape progress more than any human speech ever will. This is one of those simple truths that migration stories sometimes flatten. The trail is not just human ambition in motion, it is also bovine patience. At midday, the train halts for a short break. The stillness feels strange after the steady creak of movement. People sink onto rocks, grass, or wagon tongues with the grateful collapse of the already tired. Bread is eaten, bacon's nibbled. Water is passed around carefully, never carelessly. Children dart off and are immediately called back. Boots are checked, feet are rubbed. Someone laughs at the universal surprise that walking all day is astonishingly hard on the feet. Human beings do love to be shocked by predictable consequences. A woman nearby wrings out a cloth and wipes dust from a child's face, though the effect lasts perhaps 10 seconds. Another straightens a bonnet crushed under bedding. A man inspects a wheel hub as if glaring at it might improve the grease. You notice that even rest is busy. There is always a strap to tighten an animal, to watch a dropped item, to find a meal to think about, a mile to worry over. Scholars continue to debate whether many emigrants were psychologically prepared for how monotonous the trail could be, because diaries reveal a blend of awe and tedium that does not fit neatly into the heroic legend. That seems exactly right. The plains are spacious and moving, yes, but they also require hours of repeated steps, repeated sights, repeated sounds. Grandeur and monotony walk side by side out here, and neither leaves much room in the wagon. When the train starts again, afternoon light turns harsher. Shadows shorten. Your hat brim becomes a tiny private mercy. The road ahead quivers slightly in the heat. Someone begins another song, more for rhythm than beauty. Wheels bite into dry earth. Your legs continue their argument with the day. Yet something has already shifted inside you. The town is behind. Packing is behind. The motion has become real. By late afternoon, you understand why people said the trail changed them mile by mile. Not in some grand moral sense yet, but physically quietly. Your stride adjusts. Your attention sharpens toward practical things, a loose chain, a tired animal, a child edging too near a wheel. The body learns before the spirit can catch up. Walking does that. It narrows life to what is immediate and then strangely widens it again. As evening begins to gather at the edges of the sky, the wagons keep their slow procession a little longer. Each one rocking forward through dust, touched now with golden light. The first day has not made you heroic. It has made you aware of weight, of pay, of company, of how long a day can be when measured in footsteps. And somewhere ahead, just beyond the next rise, you know the camp will soon be made, fires lit, and this moving little world will circle itself for the night. Got it, and I'll vary those expressions from here on so they feel more natural and less patterned. By the time the wagons begin to slow for evening, the light has turned syrupy and low, brushing the canvas covers with gold and warming even the dust into something almost beautiful. Almost. Your legs feel wooden, your shoulders hum with a dull ache, and the inside of your mouth tastes of sunroad and the faint ghost of salt pork. Yet this is the hour when the moving world becomes a temporary village. The long line bends inward. Voices grow more practical. Animals are guided off the track. Someone points toward grass and water. Someone else points toward a patch of ground and insists it is level, which in trail language can mean anything from mildly slanted to spiritually insulting. Camp is not a cozy pause arranged by invisible staff. It is another round of labour wrapped in sunset colours. The wagons are brought together in a loose circle or line, depending on the terrain, the company, and the preference of whoever is making decisions in a tone that suggests they were born for this exact inconvenience. Fires must be built, water fetched, livestock watered and guarded, supper prepared, gear checked, children counted. The day does not end so much as change jobs. You step into camp on feet that no longer feel entirely theoretical. The ground here is springy with grass, in some places bare and packed in others. It smells of crushed weeds, animal sweat smoke, and the damp sweetness of nearby water. A kettle lid clatters, a bucket splashes, oxen snort with what sounds like profound disapproval at being unyoked, though perhaps that is merely your imagination lending them commentary. They lower their heads to graze with the grave concentration of creatures who know supper is never guaranteed in ideal conditions. One thing that appears again and again in emigrant accounts is how little privacy camp life allowed. People cooked, argued, prayed, coughed, laughed, and snored in close company night after night. The trail compressed domestic life until everyone's habits became public knowledge. If you stir your mush too loudly, someone hears it. If your child cries at midnight, everyone hears that too. If your husband claims he knows how to mend harness and plainly does not well, the entire camp may enjoy that performance before breakfast. Supper begins in stages. First comes fuel. Dried buffalo chips will matter later on the plains, but for now, wood can still be gathered in many places, and children are sent scampering with armfuls of sticks while adults sort kettles and ironware. Then comes water, and that means lifting, carrying, straining, boiling, and trying not to think too much about what may be floating in it upstream. Then the meal itself. Bacon fried if there is enough, bread or biscuits if there is time, beans if someone has planned ahead, coffee if the camp is lucky and sensible. Coffee, you are beginning to understand, is less a drink than a small emotional rescue. A detail that turns up in more than one recollection is that some travellers, despite the rough conditions, still tried to preserve little courtesies of table life. Cloth spread on a wagon tongue, tin cups wiped before use, a family pausing for a brief grace before eating, even while one child fidgets and another tries to poke the fire with a stick clearly too large for the purpose. That effort at order feels touching out here. Civilization has not vanished. It has simply been folded into smaller, smokier shapes. You crouch near a fire and feel the warmth reach your knees first, then your hands as you hold them toward the flames. Smoke drifts into your face because smoke on the trail always seems to choose the most inconvenient direction with a kind of malicious intelligence. Your eyes sting. Grease pops in the pan. Someone nearby laughs at a joke you missed because you were busy trying not to burn your supper. Evening on the trail is full of these little overlapping sounds, spoons against tin-low conversation, the thump of a mallet against a wheel peg, a baby fussing a hymn half-remembered, cattle bells further off in the dimming grass. Music sometimes enters camp as naturally as smoke. A fiddle comes out from its wrapping. A hymn is sung in uneven harmony. A sentimental ballad drifts through the twilight, a tune about home, or sweethearts or rivers. No one expected to miss quite this much. Not every camp is cheerful, of course, but many did make room for song. People need rhythm after a day of trudging, and they need beauty after a day of dust. Even a badly played fiddle can sound miraculous if you have walked 15 miles behind oxen. There is also gossip, because human beings remain impressively committed to gossip under every conceivable historical condition. Someone heard of cholera further up the route. Someone else swears a family ahead lost a wheel in a river crossing. A man claims the grass is better 2 days west. A woman says the price of flour at the next fort will be scandalous. None of this can be fully confirmed, which only improves its circulation. Camps are little marketplaces of rumour, and rumour travels faster than any wagon. Researchers do not entirely agree on how formal most wagon train organisation really was from one group to another. Some companies elected captains and set written rules. Others seem to have run more loosely guided by habit necessity and the loudest available opinion. Sitting beside the fire, you can see how both might be true. There are always people inclined toward order and people inclined toward improvisation. Out here, they must somehow share a road, a camp, and occasionally a skillet. After the meal comes mending. This may be the least glamorous of oars and most essential evening ritual of all. Harness straps are checked for wear. Wheel hubs are examined. Torn clothing is stitched by firelight. Boots are inspected with the solemn attention usually reserved for legal documents. A loose seam today becomes a misery tomorrow. A cracked wagon part ignored at sunset may become a full catastrophe before noon, so the camp settles into that quiet second labour, the one done with tired hands and careful eyes. Children, meanwhile, still manage to be children. They chase each other around wagon tongues, collect odd stones, complain of hunger immediately after eating, and find games in patches of dirt. One little boy proudly displays a frog to an audience that did not request this honour. Another child falls asleep mid-complaint cheek against a rolled blanket, as if the day simply switched her off. Their resilience is both heartening and faintly unnerving. As darkness thickens, the campfire light grows softer and more important. Faces become amber and shadowed. Beyond the wagons, the prairie stretches out in silver and black, full of insect song and the occasional shifting shape of grazing stock. Night on the trail has its own texture. Cooler air settles over your skin. Damp rises from the ground. The stars begin to sharpen overhead in a sky so wide it makes your thoughts feel small in the most peaceful way. You listen to the final sounds before sleep gathers in earnest. Someone banks the fire. Someone coughs into a blanket. Leather creaks as a man rolls over near a wagon wheel. From somewhere in the darkness comes the low, steady tearing sound of oxen grazing. It is oddly soothing, that rough animal munching, like the trail itself settling its jaw for the night. And for all the fatigue, all the grime, all the cramped arrangements and smoky suppers, you feel a faint little thread of comfort winding through the camp. Not luxury, certainly not as, but pattern. A day has begun, moved and ended. People have eaten, animals have fed, wheels have held. The world has not collapsed. On a journey like this, such modest success glows warmly. You lie down at last beneath canvas or stars with the smell of smoke woven into your clothes and hair, and let your body sink towards sleep. Tomorrow will bring the same chores in a slightly different landscape. More walking, more dust, more meals coaxed from simple stores. But tonight the wagons are still, the fires are low, and the little wandering village breathes around you in the dark. By the time another dawn seeps across the canvas and grass, you are beginning to understand that the trail does not merely test families. It redistributes their labour, strips it bare, and then asks who is still standing when the day runs out. If you look closely, and you do because walking gives you plenty of time to observe, you see that women are not drifting through this migration as passive companions in bonnets. They are cooking, cleaning, sewing, and tending children, nursing the sick, calming tempers, salvaging mills, sorting stores, and somehow keeping the whole fragile machinery of daily life from sliding into complete disorder. The wagons move west, yes, but ordinary survival is carried forward on 1,000 repetitive tasks, and women are often the ones quietly doing most of them. The morning begins before the road does. Fires must be coaxed back to life from banked coals or started again from scratch. Water has to be fetched in the grey chill while the grass wets your hem and the bucket handle bites into your fingers. Breakfast appears only because someone planned it, lit it, stirred it and served it while also keeping a child away from the fire and another from wandering under a wagon wheel. Men may yoke oxen and inspect chains, but the camp itself does not rise smoothly by accident. It rises because someone makes it rise. This is one of the clearest truths in women's trail diaries. Their work did not pause for the journey. In many ways, it intensified. Household labour, already substantial in 19th century America, became harder on the road because every task had to be done outdoors in motion with limited water, soot dust and constant interruption. Even baking bread, that humble domestic achievement, becomes part chemistry experiment, part endurance event, part act of faith when your kitchen is afire on uneven ground and your ingredients have been rattled across miles of ruts. You watch a woman knead dough on a board balanced over her lap while the wagon jolts beside her. She has a baby tied close, an older child asking questions at a speed no philosopher could answer, and a skillet warming over the coals. She does not look poetic. She looks competent in the way history often forgets to admire properly. Flour dust catches the morning light on her sleeves, sweat darkens the fabric at her back. There is no applause, there is breakfast. Clothing adds its own burden. Long skirts gather dust and burrs with a sort of vindictive enthusiasm. Petticoats trap heat. Bonnets help against sun but hold sweat around the face. Hands chap from washing, hauling, scrubbing and wind. Yet appearances still matter to some degree, not because vanity is frivolous, but because dignity can be a form of resistance. You notice women shaking out aprons, smoothing collars, retying ribbons, repairing torn seams by firelight. To remain neat even briefly is to insist that hardship has not swallowed the self whole. A smaller, stranger detail from emigrant recollections is how often women improvised beauty where none was required. A bit of ribbon saved for Sunday. Hair combed carefully before evening. Wildflowers tucked into a bonnet band or pressed into a diary. That does not sound like foolish ornament, it sounds like morale. Human beings do not live by bacon and beans alone, though the beans would certainly like more recognition. The trail also rearranges authority inside families in ways that are not always visible from the outside. Publicly, many households still present the husband or father as the decision-maker, the man of the wagon, the voice of direction. Yet on the ground, in the smoke and fuss and repetition of camp life, women often manage the stores, decide how food is stretched, judge when a child is truly sick, remember where the thread is packed and know exactly how much coffee remains, no matter what any man confidently assumes. If that sounds like power in plain clothes, that is because it is. Modern historians continue to wrestle with how far the journey changed gender roles in practice. Some evidence suggests the trail reinforced old expectations by making women's domestic work more relentless than ever. Other evidence hints that the journey exposed how essential and wide-ranging that work was, giving women a more visible authority within the family economy. Most likely, as with so many human arrangements, both things happened at once. The bonnet and the burden went together. As the train moves out for the day, you see the pattern stretch with it. Women walk too. Of course they walk. They walk while carrying infants, guiding children, gathering dropped items, watching for hazards and keeping half an eye on the wagon load. They are not simply passengers in this story. Their shoes wear down on the same road. Their faces burn in the same wind. Their bodies tire in the same heat, all while holding together the emotional weather of a family that may be one broken axle away from tears. There is a kind of emotional housekeeping to trail life as well, and it falls heavily on women's shoulders. Someone must soothe frightened children when thunder rolls. Someone must settle quarrels before they poison the camp. Someone must reassure a husband who hides his worry badly. Someone must absorb the grief when a treasured possession is lost, or a letter from home is taken out and read again until the paper softens. Feelings much like cooking pots do not manage themselves. At noon a family halts near you, and the scene unfolds with efficient chaos. A cloth spread, bread cut, bacon passed. A toddler lifted away from a kettle just in time. A boy sent for water and sent again because he forgot the cup. A torn sleeve inspected. A sunbonnet adjusted on a face gone red from the glare. The woman at the centre of it all does not sit until everyone else has something in hand. When she finally does lower herself to the ground, the relief is visible right through her posture. Even rest is earned in installments. One documented reality of the overland journey is that women often kept diaries in remarkable detail recording mileage, weather illness, births, deaths, arguments, landscapes, and chores. That matters because it means much of what we know about the emotional and domestic texture of trail life comes through their eyes. Men frequently wrote too, certainly, but women's accounts are often especially sharp on the constant labour of keeping people fed, clothed, and steady. Their words preserve what grander narratives tend to skip. Not just the mountains and rivers, but the mending and the washing and the way smoke stings your ears while a child cries for home. And yes, washing. Even the idea of laundry on the trail sounds exhausting. Shirts, stockings, aprons, children's clothes, cloths for babies. All of it must at times be soaked, scrubbed, wrung and dried when water and time allow. Picture kneeling by a stream with cold water numbing your hands, lye soap biting at cracked skin, and a line of garments flapping between wagons while dust settles on them before they are fully dry. Progress and cleanliness do not make natural companions. There are moments of gentleness too. Women sharing recipes that barely deserve the name under the circumstances. One lending another a needle. One braiding a girl's hair while they walk. Another quietly taking over a crying infant so the mother can sit for 5 blessed minutes with both hands free. These small exchanges do not look dramatic, but they are the trail's social glue. Without them, every wagon would become an island of tired people drifting apart. Some families fracture under strain. That part is important too. Tiredness sharpens tempers, hunger narrows patience. Repetition can make even beloved voices sound abrasive. The road exposes selfishness very quickly and it punishes it just as quickly. If one person refuses to help, someone else must take up the slack. Usually that someone is a woman who had no surplus energy to begin with. By evening, after another day of walking, the camp forms again and the second shift begins. Fires, food, children, clothing, comforting, preparing for tomorrow. The tasks come one after another like beads on a string, with no obvious end, and still they are done. You watch a woman sit by the fire mending a shirt with her head bowed, flames touching the side of her face with orange light, the rest of her already leaning towards sleep. Her fingers keep moving anyway. It becomes impossible not to see the journey differently now. The trail is not only measured in miles and landmarks, it is measured in loaves baked badly and bravely, in shirts patched in children, soothed in coffee grounds, eked out for one more morning, in the invisible steadiness women provide, while everyone else talks about reaching Oregon. The road ahead is long, but the truth is already plain. Men may speak of conquest and arrival. Women make sure anyone gets there in a shirt with supper, and with some faint remnant of home still tucked inside the day. The children have been here all along, of course, threaded through every camp and every mile, like loose bright stitches in a rough quilt, but now you begin to see the journey the way they do, or at least as closely as an adult can manage while carrying water, worrying about weather, and trying not to step in anything deposited by oxen. For children, the trail is not one long solemn march of national destiny. It is boredom, surprise hunger, fascination, petty injustice, scraped knees, terrifying moments, and then somehow a game made from sticks by sunset. They live in the same hardship as everyone else, but they encounter it at a different height, and often with startling elasticity. In the morning, they wake rumpled and warm from shared bedding, hair flattened, oddly faces creased from blankets blinking at the pale canvas light as if the prairie itself has personally interrupted their sleep. Some are cheerful in that offensive way children occasionally are before adults have had coffee. Others emerge already aggrieved, which is more understandable. Their day begins at once. Fires to avoid, buckets to carry if they are old enough, younger siblings to watch if they are older still, shoes to pull on, stockings to find crust to eat. There is no nursery wing on the Oregon Trail, only the open air and whatever patience the grown-ups still possess. The record is clear on one point. Many emigrant families brought numerous children west, and children made up a very large part of wagon train populations. This was not a trail of hardy lone wanderers with cinematic stubble and meaningful silence. It was full of families, and that means noise, crying babies, laughing girls, boys testing the exact limit of how far they can run before an adult voice calls them back in a tone that means immediately. Teenagers trying to look useful, while also trying not to die of embarrassment in front of strangers they have now known for weeks. You notice how quickly children become competent in the small practical ways. A little girl no taller than a wagon wheel knows where the tin cups are packed and can fold blankets tighter than her father. A boy with sunburnt ears can drive loose chickens toward camp with surprising skill. Another child carries kindling in 2 serious fistfuls and looks as proud as if he has built a fort. Responsibility arrives early out here, not because anyone enjoys burdening children, but because the day has too much work in it to leave many hands idle. And yet childhood persists with stubborn force. A ditch becomes an exciting obstacle. Prairie flowers become treasure. A bent nail becomes a toy until an adult confiscates it with the weariness of someone who's already prevented 6 other tragedies before breakfast. Children pick up feathers, stones, seed pods, bones, and anything else the landscape offers. They collect the trail in their pockets and then forget those pockets are in the wash pile. One almost admires the consistency. There is a curious little detail in several reminiscences from former trail children. Many remembered the journey in fragments of sensation rather than grand events. The taste of buffalo meat, the terror of river water, the delight of running barefoot in camp, the smell of sage after rain. That rings true. Adults organize memory around decisions and danger. Children often remember texture, flavor, and the exact unfairness of being told not to touch something interesting. Walking is harder on them than the cheerful mythology later admits. Little legs do not stretch miles with effortless grace. Feet blister. Tempers snap. Heat wilts them. Dust gets in their noses, eyes, and bread. When they are very small, they must be carried or lifted into wagons when room permits, but room is always a negotiation. Older children walk much of the time trotting, lagging, darting ahead, falling behind, and being called back into the moving orbit of family. You hear adults repeating the same instructions in endless variations. Stay away from the wheels, do not wander, hold your sister's hand, come back here. Not that stick, definitely not that snake. Illness strikes children cruelly on the trail because they are small, vulnerable, and impossible not to love with your entire frightened heart. A feverish child changes the emotional temperature of a whole wagon. Even a mild stomach complaint can ripple outward into worry, extra work, and whispered speculation. 19th century medicine offers only limited reassurance in the best of settings, and this is very far from the best of settings. Every parent becomes partner, part watcher, part silent bargainer with fate. Specialists still disagree about how much children fully understood the risks around them as the journey unfolded. Some letters and memoirs suggest remarkable awareness, especially among older children who watched adults closely and overheard more than the adults realized. Other accounts hint that many children move through danger with only partial comprehension, sensing alarm without grasping its scale. Both possibilities can coexist quite easily. A child can know a river is frightening without understanding the statistics of drowning. A child can sense grief before learning its vocabulary. What surprises you is how often children seem to restore a camp's mood just by being themselves. At midday, one little boy chases his hat downhill and turns the entire stop into a comedy, as 3 adults and 1 dog join the pursuit. Near the fire, a girl invents a doll from cloth scraps and names it after a grandmother, left behind in Missouri. 2 brothers crouch in the dirt drawing wagon ruts with sticks, making a game out of the very thing, wearing out their shoes. Even complaints can be oddly life-giving. A child announcing that beans are boring is in its own irritating way proof that ordinary human standards still exist. Schooling does not vanish completely, though it becomes irregular and improvised. Some parents teach letters from a Bible, some from memory spelling, from scraps of paper. A mother points to plants and names them. A father quizzes mileage and direction. Stories do some of the work too. History scripture, family law, practical instruction all mixed together in the evening while the fire lowers and children droop against blankets. Education on the trail is not a classroom. It is whatever can be carried in the mind when books are heavy and daylight short. A lesser-known bit of trail life is how often children helped with livestock. They watched calves shooed, strays gathered chips for fuel later on the plains and ran messages from one end of a camp to the other. Not always efficiently, to be fair, but usefulness counts even when it arrives out of breath and distracted by a grasshopper. A child trusted with a tusk grows into it, even if halfway through he becomes fascinated by mud. The trail can also be terribly unkind to children's sense of security. Home, after all, has dissolved into motion. Beds are temporary, meals are uncertain, familiar neighbours replaced by fellow travellers who may be kind, stern, nosy, funny, or all four at once. Parents are more tired than children have ever seen them. Adults whisper at might. Wagons break, animals vanish, storms arrive loudly. Rivers look too big. To be a child here is to live in a world that keeps changing shape beneath your feet. And still children adapt with unnerving speed. They learn the sounds of camp, the difference between a routine shout and a frightened one, the smell of coffee beginning, the meaning of a yoke being lifted, the hour when wagons usually move, the fun of echoing someone's call across open land until an adult says enough. Their bodies harden, their faces darken in the sun, and their games grow out of whatever surrounds them. This is not innocent in the sentimental sense. It is resilient in the old human sense. As evening gathers, you watch them begin to fold back into camp life. One nods off while chewing. Another leans against a sibling and stares at the fire with huge, solemn eyes. A baby makes those small, sleepy sounds that seem half bird, half sigh. Somewhere a mother hums. Somewhere a father lets a child ride briefly on the wagon tongue just for a laugh. And for a fleeting moment, the whole camp feels less like an expedition and more like a strange, wandering household stitched together by fatigue and affection. The children will remember this, though not all in the same way. They will remember the road as endless or exciting or frightening or dull. They will remember one river, one storm, one joke, one biscuit, one grave, one song. For now they simply curl into blankets while the stars open above them, and the trail which asks so much of everyone asks tomorrow's strength from them too. By now the romance of departure has worn off like cheap polish in bad weather, and what remains is a slower, truer picture of power on the trail. Not power in speeches or proud declarations, though there is plenty of that too, usually from men standing with their thumbs tucked into belts as if confidence alone can mend a wheel. No, this is power measured in drag leverage, muscle, patience, and the broad-breathing bodies of oxen. You come to see that men's authority on the trail is constantly being tested by the plain fact that nature, machinery, and livestock are not especially impressed by human self-importance. Morning starts with the teams. Before coffee feels real, and before the sun has done more than tint the horizon, men are already moving among the oxen, with yokes, chains, bows, and commands. Wood knocks against horn, iron rattles, leather creaks with that thick, worked sound it makes when damp from night air. The animals stand in a fog of breath and smell warm and grassy and slightly sour, immense as furniture that has suddenly learned to exhale. One man speaks to them gently, almost conversationally. Another barks as though volume were a kind of engineering. The oxen appear equally untroubled by both styles, which is quietly funny. A plain historical point sits at the centre of this scene. Oxen were the most common draft animals for the Oregon Trail because they were durable, comparatively cheap, and better suited than horses to the long, punishing journey. They moved more slowly, yes, but slow and steady was often exactly what survival required. Horses might look noble, mules might seem sharper, but oxen were the practical champions of westward migration. They pulled the future one resentful hoofstep at a time. Watching the men handle them, you begin to notice the difference between showmanship and skill. Skill is quiet, checks a hoof before trouble starts. It notices a sore neck under the yoke, keeps the chain from tangling before the wagon lurches. Showmanship prefers dramatic shouts, impatient tugging, and a great many declarations about how things ought to be done. The trail is a ruthless editor of masculine vanity. A man may arrive in Missouri with a reputation, but out here the oxen and the terrain conduct the real interview. There are captains in some trains or men treated as natural leaders, whether anyone officially voted on it or not. Someone decides when to move, where to camp, how to space the wagons, when to push onward, and when to stop pretending optimism is a strategy. Yet leadership is fragile here. If a man chooses badly, everyone notices. If he leads them into poor grass, bad water, or an ugly crossing, his authority thins quickly. The prairie does not care for titles, and tired families are not endlessly patient with mistakes. You hear arguments in low, sharp bursts. One man wants to press farther before noon. Another says the animals need water first. One insists a different track is shorter. Another says shorter is not the same as better, which feels like wisdom broad enough for several centuries. These are not theatrical confrontations with dueling pistols and noble profile shots. They are grimy working disagreements shaped by dust fatigue and the fact that nobody likes being told he's wrong in front of 30 witnesses and a suspicious mule. A curious little detail from several emigrant descriptions is how often men took fierce pride in their wagons, and teams speaking of them almost as extensions of themselves. A well-loaded wagon, a dependable yoke of oxen, a wheel that ran true, these became points of honour. That makes sense. On the trail, competence needs visible objects to cling to. A polished speech does not pull you through mud. A sound axle might. Still manhood. Here is not a simple matter of command, it is labour. Heavy labour, repetitive labour, awkward labour. Men lift tongues, brace wheels, cut brush, ford streams, chase loose stock repair, spokes, grease hubs, and walk mile after mile in boots that are already beginning to shape themselves around pain. Whatever ideas they bring about being providers or protectors must eventually pass through the hands. Can you fix this? Can you carry that? Can you keep the team moving? Can you stay calm when the wagon leans in a river and somebody gasps? There is a continuing discussion among historians about whether the trail strengthened traditional male authority or exposed its limits more clearly than life back east did. The evidence points in both directions. On one hand, men often handled external dealings, route choices, and draft animals which reinforced a public role of command. On the other hand, the journey repeatedly showed that command was never enough by itself. Men depended on women's labour, children's help, neighbours' cooperation, and animals' endurance. The myth of the lone decisive patriarch looks much shakier when his wheel is in a rut and he needs 4 other people and 2 oxen to solve it. And then there are the oxen themselves, the real old souls of the trail. You begin to know their pace, not just visually, but physically, in your own stride and breathing. They walk with a kind of grave commitment that can seem noble until they stop dead for reasons known only to themselves. Then they become philosophers of obstruction. Their hides twitch at flies. Their flanks shine dark with sweat in the heat. Their hooves make that dull, dependable thud on the earth a sound so regular it can become almost meditative. If the wagon train has a heartbeat, it may be hoofbeats. Men talk about their teams constantly. Which ox is strong, which is lazy, which pair works best together, which one has a sore shoulder. The language can sound rough, but there is often respect in it, even affection disguised as complaint. A good team is money motion and hope all yoked together. Lose the animals, and you do not simply lose transport. You lose the engine of the entire enterprise. At midday, one wagon ahead of you stalls on a slight rise. Nothing dramatic, just enough incline and enough softness in the earth to make progress stubborn. The driver clucks and calls. The wheels groan. The oxen lean. Dust shifts under their hooves. For a moment, everything seems held in place by tension and sound. Then men step in from nearby shoulders to spokes hands to wheel rims, boots digging into ground. There is no debate now, only effort. The wagon jerks forward and a little cheer goes up, half relief, half obvious habit. This is trail society in miniature. Pride first, then cooperation. The work leaves marks. Men's shirts darken along the spine, hat bands salt with sweat. Palms harden, beards catch dust and grease, sun reddens the backs of the necks. Even posture changes. You can often tell the experienced from the inexperienced not by what they say, but by how they bend, lift, and conserve themselves. The wise do not waste movement. They know the day is long and the trail always has another demand in reserve. There is humour too, because there has to be. Someone jokes that the oxen have the only sensible pace in the whole migration. Another remarks that a wagon wheel receives more daily attention than some husbands gave their wives back home. This earns a sharp look and a laugh in equal measure. Teasing helps. So does the shared acknowledgement that everyone is improvising within a story later generations will simplify beyond recognition. By late afternoon, the men's voices grow rougher, not angrier exactly, just worn by sun and repetition. Commands shorten. Gestures replace words. A hand lifted means wait. A nod means go on. A glance at a wheel says more than a speech. The camp still lies ahead, and until it does, no one fully relaxes. Even easy ground can produce a broken pin, a thrown chain, a straying animal, a child too close to danger. When the wagons finally ease into evening formation, the men do not stop working so much as switch categories. Yokes off, hooves checked, wheels greased, harness mended, news traded, opinions offered, fatigue carried like a second shirt. You watch one man lean against a wheel and close his eyes for 3 breaths before pushing off again to help another with a chain. That tiny pause feels truer than any speech about grit. The lesson of the day settles quietly. Authority on the Oregon Trail is never abstract for long. It must feed animals, read ground judge, weather, listen, sometimes yield, sometimes and accept help without too much wounded pride. And beneath all of it, always are the oxen walking, as if they have seen through the entire human performance and decided to proceed anyway, one measured step at a time. Rain changes everything before you even fully wake. You hear it first, a soft drumming on canvas that might sound cozy in a snug house with a proper roof, a dry bed, and nowhere urgent to be. Out here it is less charming. It is an announcement. It says the ground will turn heavy, the wagon covers will leak at their favourite weak points, the fire will sulk, the animals will stink more impressively than usual, and every mile ahead will ask twice the effort for half the progress. You lie still for one brief second, listening to the steady patter overhead, and think the rain sounds almost peaceful. Then a cold drip lands directly on your forehead, and the illusion ends. The camp rises slower in wet weather. Blankets feel clammy. Clothes which never entirely dried from yesterday's sweat now greet the morning with the texture of reluctant laundry. Smoke from the fire sits low and mean because damp wood never misses a chance to be difficult. Someone coughs, someone mutters, a child begins the day in tears over wet shoes, which honestly is not unreasonable. The grass brushes your ankles like chilled fingers as you step out into the grey light. Water is both blessing and menace on the trail. Everyone needs it, talks about it, seeks it, fears it. Streams promise relief, then threaten a wagon axle. Rivers offer passage and terror in the same glance. Rain fills barrels and flattens spirits. One established fact about the Oregon Trail is that river crossings were among the most dangerous parts of the journey. People and animals drowned, wagons tipped, supplies floated away. A river did not have to be grand or famous to ruin lives. It only had to be swift, deep, and badly judged. For now, though, the immediate enemy is mud. The road, if you're feeling generous enough to call it that, softens into a broad smear of brown earth, cut by ruts that look manageable until you step into one and nearly leave a shoe behind. Wheels sink, hooves squelch, your hem darkens at once. Mud splashes up the side of the wagon in crude patterns that no one will ever frame. The sound of travel changes too. Yesterday the wheels creaked and rolled. Today they suck, drag, and complain. Every motion sounds heavier. You walk beside the wagon with your eyes fixed on the ground as much as the horizon, because this is no day for lofty reflection while crossing slick clay in worn shoes. The oxen lower their heads and lean into the yoke with that patient misery only oxen can make look philosophical. Mud cakes around their hooves. Their hides go dark with rain. One shakes itself and sends droplets in a wide arc that catches 2 children and 1 deeply offended man. The ox seems untroubled by the social consequences. There is a small but telling detail in several overland accounts. Emigrants often dreaded wet bedding almost as much as missed meals. That sounds dramatic until you have spent a day soaked through and realise that night offers no dry refuge, only damp blankets, damp ground, and the smell of wet wool rising around you like a curse with seams. Sleep becomes less a rest than a superstition was called Warwick. The wagons press on because there is rarely any choice. The trail does not pause politely for better conditions, and supplies do not stretch merely because the sky has become inconvenient. So the train inches forward, each family performing its own little wet comedy of endurance. Hats sag, bonnets drip, wheels jam with clay that must be scraped away. Bucket goes over. A child slips and emerges coated up to the knees, looking stunned and personally betrayed by the continent. An older woman laughs so hard she has to sit on a rock, then immediately regrets sitting on a rock in the rain. When the road slopes toward a creek crossing, everyone sharpens. What in dry weather might be annoying becomes in wet weather a serious question. The banks are slick. The water is higher than hoped, lower than feared, which is about the best anyone can say. Men wade in first to test depth trousers, dark and plastered to their legs, boots dragging against the current. Women gather children back from the edge with quick, firm hands. Animals scent the water and hesitate. The whole train seems to hold its breath. Crossings are rarely elegant. Some rivers are ferried where ferries exist, some are forded, some require partial unloading. Some demand prayer in a voice carefully disguised as a practical suggestion. Here the wagon noses down the bank wheels, jolting over stone, the canvas cover shivering under rain. Water climbs around the hub, swirls, tugs, and throws back a cold smell of silt and roots and churned weeds. You hear the sucking rush around the wheels, the driver calling to the team, the nervous hush of everyone not directly handling the wagon. There has long been disagreement among researchers over how often emigrants exaggerated river dangers in later recollections, because terror and memory are close cousins. Even so, the records leave little doubt that crossings inspired real fear. A person does not need a dramatic flood to feel mortal. A waist-deep current and a heavily loaded wagon will do nicely. Standing on the bank, you understand that perfectly. The river is not theatrical, it is indifferent, which is much worse. One odd report from the trail world holds that some families sealed wagon beds or made temporary waterproofing efforts before big crossings using tar caulk or sheer optimism. The last ingredient was especially abundant, though not always effective. Human beings will attempt remarkable things when their flour, tools, and bedding depend on it. Sometimes those attempts worked. Sometimes the river edited the plan. When your own turn comes, the water shocks even through boots and skirts or trouser legs. It is mountain cold, or at least it feels that way to legs already chilled by rain. The stones shift underfoot. The current pushes harder than it looked from shore. You keep one hand on the wagon not because it makes you safe in any grand sense, but because it gives your body a lie to believe. The oxen heave forward. The wagon lurches. A barrel thumps inside. For one unpleasant moment, the tilt feels wrong and everyone's heart seems to lift into their throat. Then the wheels catch the team pulls and the wagon climbs the far bank with all the grace of a wardrobe escaping a pond. Relief on the other side is never glamorous. It is a gasp, a laugh too loud, a quick inventory. Is everyone here? Are the sacks dry enough? Did anything fall out? Who lost a hat? Why is the dog wet and delighted? The answers come in fragments, but the important one is clear. You are across. Rain keeps at it through the afternoon, sometimes fine and misty, sometimes in heavier bursts that drum on canvas and shoulders alike. The world narrows to grey distance, muddy ground, dark animals, and the little circle of people nearest your wagon. Wet weather does that. It pulls the horizon inward and makes existence more immediate. Hands, rope, wheels, firewood, if any can still be called wood rather than damp persuasion. The grand westward idea shrinks to the next half mile, and yet the land has its beauty even in this mood. Rain beads on tall grass, creek edges shine silver, low clouds drag their bellies over the far rises. The smell after a downpour is rich and living mud and leaves and bruised stems and cold stone. If you are not tired and wet and slightly cross, you might call it lovely without reservation. Camp that evening is a soggy masterpiece of stubbornness. Fires take forever. Smoke clings. Supper tastes more of effort than flavour. Socks steam near flames. Children are peeled from wet garments with much wriggling and objection. A woman wrings out a skirt and watches a ribbon of brown water twist into the grass. Men inspect wheels with the solemn despair of people who know mud will still be there tomorrow. Someone finally gets coffee going, and the mood lifts so suddenly you would think civilization itself has been restored. You settle under damp canvas, listening to runoff drip from wagon edges and the occasional stamp of restless animals. The day has been slow, dirty, cold and anxious, yet it has also drawn one more line of practical knowledge into you. Rain is not just weather. Water is not just water. On the trail, every crossing asks a question and every storm rewrites the answer. Tomorrow the mud will still cling, the creeks will still mutter, and the road ahead will still pretend to be passable. You will rise and test that claim again. The rain passes, but it leaves behind a different kind of difficulty, because now the sky clears and the land begins to bake. By noon the world feels as though it has been set under a great invisible lid. Heat presses down from above, rises from below, and wraps itself around your shoulders and throat until you can hardly remember the wet misery of yesterday without feeling a little nostalgic, which is truly impressive. Only the Oregon Trail could make mud seem like a fond memory 24 hours later. Morning gives you a brief kindness. The air starts cool enough to breathe deeply. The grass still holds a trace of night in it. The animals move with more ease. Wheels roll more freely now that the road has begun to firm up. You almost believe this will be a better day. Then the sun climbs, the shade shrinks, the dust begins its quiet campaign, and by the time you have settled into your walking pace, you feel the first dry scrape at the back of your throat. That dust gets into everything. Not poetically, thoroughly. It creeps into food, bedding, boots, eyes, hair, collars, cuffs, and the corners of your mouth. It softens the outlines of wagons in the distance and then crusts in pale streaks on the dark cloth and sunburnt skin. It lies on bacon. It settles in coffee. It turns sweat into paste along the neck and temples. A person could become philosophical about dust if sufficiently sleep-deprived, but on the whole you prefer to curse it silently and keep walking. The open plains could be brutally hot in summer, and trail journals make that point with weary consistency. Emigrants often travelled under long hours of sun with little shelter beyond hats, bonnets, and the occasional mercy of a cloud. Shade was not a dependable feature. Trees thinned, streams wandered away from the road. The sky seemed to widen precisely so the sun could have a better angle from which to inspect your suffering. That is one of those simple trail realities that later stories sometimes smooth over. vast beauty is still very hot when there is nowhere to hide. By mid-morning, the air shimmers over the track ahead. The wagon line wavers a little in the distance as though seen through water, which feels rude when actual water is what you want. Every movement becomes more deliberate. People speak less. The oxen keep their heads low and plod with solemn dedication sides, working steadily, tails flicking at flies that appear to thrive in every possible climate. Leather gives off a warm animal smell. Grease on the wheel hub softens in the heat. Metal burns the hand if you forget yourself and grab carelessly. You begin to understand thirst as a condition that rearranges thought. At first it is a dryness, then an irritation, then a presence. You think about water while walking, while resting, while swallowing, while watching someone else drink. The rattle of a bucket becomes a sacred sound. A creek seen in the distance brightens the mood of a whole column. Even bad water, cloudy water, mineral-tasting water can look beautiful under this kind of sun. The trail does not always offer the luxury of standards. A smaller but memorable detail from trail recollections is the misery caused by alkali dust and alkali water in some western stretches. Travellers described irritation to eyes, skin and stomach, and the chalky taste could make already tired people feel even worse. You can imagine it too easily. Heat is bad enough without your drinking water deciding to conduct a chemical experiment on your insides. Nothing says adventure quite like sipping from a stream and wondering whether the stream resents you personally. The road lifts and dips in long easy swells now, and the country feels huge in a way that is both freeing and oppressive. There is so much room yet no relief. Grass ripples pale and dry in the wind. Insects click and hum. Meadowlarks flash up and vanish again. Far off a line of darker green suggests water, or perhaps disappointment. Distances lie out here with a straight face. Something that appears 1 pleasant hour away can remain half a day beyond your reach. The plains are masters of false nearness. At midday the halt comes like a collective exhale. People drop into whatever shade they can invent. Under the wagon, beside the wagon, behind a trunk, under a tilted bonnet. A man near you places his hat over his face and declares he will never move again. He does move again, of course, because the trail has no respect for dramatic pronouncements. A child sucks on a pebble not from hunger but to trick her mouth into feeling moist. Another licks the rim of an empty cup as if hoping memory itself might produce a drink. There is an ongoing discussion among historians about how much the plains environment shaped emigrants psychologically as well as physically. Some writings suggest awe, exhilaration, and a thrilling sense of space. Others reveal fatigue, fear, and the odd claustrophobia that can come from too much openness. Looking out across the heat-bleached horizon, you suspect the answer changes hour by hour. In the cool of morning, the land feels generous. At 2 in the afternoon, it feels like a test designed by someone with a cruel sense of humour. Meals in this weather become less ceremonial and more strategic. Salt matters, water matters more. Bacon grease seems suddenly less charming when the air itself feels edible. Bread dries fast. Coffee remains beloved in principle, though. By afternoon, its appeal competes with the fantasy of plunging your entire head into a cold spring. One woman fans the fire with the expression of a saint being quietly tried. Another has tied a cloth around her neck after wetting it from the water bucket, and everyone looking at her now seems to be rethinking the structure of civilization. The animals suffer too, which makes every stop a matter of urgency. Oxen need water rest and decent grazing whenever it can be found. Their labour is slow but relentless, and hot days can break them down just as surely as bad footing. People who treat them merely as moving equipment tend to learn unpleasant lessons. A weakened team means delayed progress, more strain on the rest and trouble that compounds. Survival on the trail is full of such humble mathematics. One odd practice remembered in some accounts is the way emigrants sometimes walked with cloths over nose and mouth, or used any scrap of fabric to blunt the dust. It did not solve much, but it gave the face something to do other than surrender. You see the wisdom in that. Even a thin barrier can feel like a line of civilization between you and the road trying to enter your lungs. As the afternoon drags on, tempers grow brittle. Little things snap more sharply and eat. A dropped cup, a lagging child, a wandering cow, a poorly timed remark. The body gets tired first, then the manners, yet the same weather that irritates also quiets. People conserve speech. The train moves in long, dusty silence broken only by harness sounds, wheel noise, insect song, and the occasional call drifting back from the front. The day becomes rhythmic in a harsher way than before. Step, swallow, wipe the face, step again. Toward evening, the sun lowers but does not immediately forgive. It glows large and coppery through suspended dust, turning every wagon cover honey-coloured and every moving figure into a softened silhouette. The heat begins to ease by degrees. Shoulders drop, voices return. The smell of supper fire feels less like insult and more like promise. Somewhere ahead, water must be near because the animals scent it and quicken just enough to make everyone else hopeful. Camp, when it finally forms, feels like an answer. Buckets go straight to the stream, faces are splashed, hands are soaked. Some brave soul attempts a fuller wash, gasping at the shock of cool water on overheated skin. Children revive instantly and start throwing droplets at each other until stopped. Tin cups fill and refill. Even the evening breeze seems kinder now, slipping over the grass with a softness that would have felt impossible at midday. You sit at last with your feet out, dust still coating your hems, your ankles, your very thoughts. The day has tasted of dryness, sunlight, and restraint. It has taught you that thirst is not dramatic most of the time. It is repetitive, low-level, persistent, like a small bell ringing inside the body. It has also taught you that relief can be wonderfully plain. A bucket, a stream, shade at the right hour, the first swallow of cool water after a day on the open trail. And as darkness gathers over the plains, you realize this too is part of what life was really like on the Oregon Trail while walking daily. Not just danger in the grand memorable sense, but the long trial of weather endured step by step. Yesterday mud held your shoes. Today dust claimed your throat. Tomorrow the land will devise something else. Yet tonight the heat is draining gently from the ground, the animals are quieter, and the cup in your hand is full. The plains open even wider now, and with that widening comes a different feeling in the chest. Not exactly fear, though fear still walks nearby often enough. Not exactly wonder either, though. There is plenty of that when the light falls a certain way across the grass, and the whole horizon seems to breathe. It is something quieter and stranger, a sense that the land has become so vast it can hold both abundance and loneliness without effort. You enter buffalo country like someone stepping into an old story that turns out to be much larger, dustier, and less interested in making you comfortable than expected. Morning begins with a stillness that feels almost ceremonial. The air is cooler than yesterday, and a pale gold line lies low in the east before the sun lifts itself over the rim of the world. Grass whispers under the breeze. The wagons start their familiar complaints. Oxen lean forward. The road stretches on in its broad, uncertain way. Then someone ahead raises a hand, not urgently, but with that particular stiffness that means look there. At first you see only movement in the distance, dark ripples against the land. Then the ripples gather shape. Humped backs, massive heads. A slow surging line spreading across the plain. Buffalo. Bison properly speaking, though people on the trail called them buffalo, and very few paused for zoological precision while staring at hundreds of enormous animals. You stop walking without meaning to, and so do many others. The children go quiet. Even the animals seem to sense a shift in the world. This is one of the great plain facts of the overland era. In the mid-19th century, emigrants on the trail could still encounter immense bison herds across the central plains. Their presence was one of the most striking sights many travellers ever recorded. The numbers were hard for Eastern eyes to grasp. A herd could look like weather moving over the earth, not merely animals, but a whole dark current of life flowing across the grasslands. You understand that at once. The scale unsettles the mind. They smell stronger than you expect. Warm, musky, heavy with a rank sweetness that drifts on the air. Their hooves stir dust. Their hides catch the sunlight in rough, dark waves. Calves press close to their mothers. Bulls stand broad and shaggy, carrying an expression that suggests they consider human plans irrelevant. It is not hard to believe they belong to the land more completely than you do. In fact, it is impossible not to believe it. A lesser known but vivid detail in Morrig's emigrant writings is how mixed their reactions could be. Some saw the herds as thrilling signs of the West in all its richness. Others saw meat hides fuel danger delay. Some found the animals beautiful. Some found them bothersome once hunting began or the road clogged. Human beings are wonderfully consistent in this way. Even in the presence of a natural spectacle, someone will ask whether it can be turned into supper. And yes, hunting follows often enough because the chance to supplement monotonous trail rations is hard to ignore. Men take rifles. A few younger boys stare with worshipful intensity. Women watch with varying degrees of interest, skepticism, or annoyance, depending on how much trouble usually follows enthusiasm with guns. Fresh meat can lift a camp's mood enormously, though the actual business of pursuing it is less romantic than later retellings suggest. There is stalking, waiting, misjudging distance, and a fair amount of returning with less than promised. The plains do enjoy humbling confidence. The trail, meanwhile, runs through lands long inhabited, travelled, hunted, and understood by indigenous peoples whose lives do not appear here as background scenery, merely because wagon travellers later wrote more books. You begin to notice signs that the emigrants are not the first nor the centre. Though many behave as if both are true, a distant rider, a camp trace, smoke on the horizon. The awareness arrives gradually for some, abruptly for others. You are moving through occupied worlds, not empty ones. Encounters vary just as they did in reality. Some meetings are calm, practical, even friendly. Trade takes place. Information is exchanged. A gesture toward water or better ground can mean a great deal. Some emigrants describe receiving fish berries or guidance from native people. Others approach every meeting in a state of suspicion sharpened by rumour and prejudice. That suspicion often says more about the emigrants than the people they fear. The trail carries not only wagons and flour barrels, but assumptions, and assumptions travel stubbornly. The historical record shows that many overland emigrants relied on trade or advice from native communities at various points, even while broader American expansion was damaging those very communities. That contradiction sits right in the middle of the journey, whether travellers admitted it or not. Dependence and displacement could happen in the same breath. A wagon train might accept directions to water from people whose own access to land and game was already being threatened by the tide of migration. It is an uncomfortable truth, which is often the surest sign of a true one. There remains real discussion among historians over how much everyday interaction on the trail was shaped more by mutual pragmatism than by outright hostility, at least in many stretches and periods. The answer changes by region, year, local circumstance, and the behaviour of specific groups. Yet the old legend of constant attack from every horizon does not hold up well when set beside many diaries full of routine trade observation and wary coexistence. Fear travelled fast, reality was more varied, and variation is harder to turn into myth. You see that variety in small scenes. A group of emigrants watching riders approach with strained faces that soften once exchange begins. A woman offering bread. A child staring open-mouthed at unfamiliar clothing and horses. Men trying badly to appear calm while also looking as if they would prefer to be anywhere else. Curiosity sits beside tension. It often does in human affairs. People can be uncertain and interested at the same time. One odd tidbit from the trail world is how souvenirs from buffalo country could end up tucked into wagons or pockets despite every warning about extra weight. Horns, hides, bones, a tuft of hair, some tangible proof that you had seen the great herds and walked these plains. This is deeply understandable and deeply inconvenient, which describes many human choices under strain. The trail teaches restraint, and still people insist on keeping a token now and then. As the day goes on, the herds thin and spread, some remain visible at a distance, dark commas moving along ridges, or scattered in shallow draws. The road feels lonelier after they pass, strangely enough. Their presence had made the land seem inhabited in a powerful, undeniable way. Without them, the plain returns to its more difficult mood, the one made of openness and distance and that unsettling absence of walls. Yet now you know the emptiness isn't an illusion. Life is everywhere out here, only not arranged for your convenience. The camp that evening carries a different hum. There is more talk than usual, more retelling of what was seen, more gestures, with hands held wide to suggest impossible numbers. Children draw buffalo shapes in the dirt. Men compare hunting stories with the usual inflation around the edges. Someone cooks meat if the day has gone well. If it has not, people still talk as though it nearly did. That too is an old custom. Smoke rises into a sky gone soft with evening. The grass darkens. Bells clink from the livestock. A few people sit looking west in silence, perhaps thinking not about Oregon at all for once, but about the scale of what they crossed today. Not miles, not rivers. Presence. The great animal life of the plains. The human worlds already rooted there, the unsettling recognition that your wagon train is only one moving thread in a much older fabric. Night settles slowly, and with it comes that peculiar plains hush, never truly silent, always stitched with insect sounds. Low animal movement, a distant call, the occasional murmur from a neighbouring fire. You lie down with the smell of smoke and grass in your clothes, and the dark shapes of buffalo still lingering in the mind. The trail has shown you another of its truths. Walking west is not only about hardship, it is also about entering landscapes dense with life history and people whose stories do not begin when your wagon arrives. Remembering that changes the road, and perhaps it changes you as well. By now you no longer need anyone to tell you that the body is fragile. The trail has been explaining that in 100 small ways for days, perhaps weeks, with every blister, every strained shoulder, every sleepless night under damp blankets or hot canvas. But illness makes the lesson sharper. It takes the ordinary wear of walking and tips it into something darker, quieter and harder to manage. Out here, where the road keeps moving and help is whatever you brought in a box or learned from a grandmother, sickness does not arrive as a private inconvenience. It enters camp like bad weather. Everyone feels it. Morning begins with a cough that does not stop soon enough. Then another. Then the unmistakable sound of someone being sick behind a wagon, followed by the lowered voices adults use when they do not want to frighten children, and therefore frighten them at once. The air is cool, almost innocent, but the mood has changed before breakfast is properly underway. A person can lift a kettle tie, a bonnet check a wheel, and still feel that something has shifted. Illness has a way of thinning the edges of normality. The Oregon Trail was notorious for disease, especially cholera, during some peak migration years in the mid-19th century. That much is firmly established. Spread through contaminated water and poor sanitation, cholera could move fast through emigrant routes, striking with terrifying speed. Not every train faced it in the same way, and not every sickness was cholera, but the fear of sudden disease travelled nearly as quickly as rumour. You hear the word spoken carefully, sometimes not spoken at all, as though silence itself might be medicinal. Yet most of trail illness is not dramatic in the theatrical sense. It is exhaustion, diarrhea, fever, headaches, infected cuts, teething babies, sore eyes from dust, women weakened by pregnancy, childbirth, or relentless labour, men trying to pretend a strained back is nothing until they can no longer straighten properly, children going limp with heat, elderly travellers losing weight one careful mile at a time. The body keeps the score of every compromise, and the trail offers many. One very human detail from the overland world is the astonishing variety of remedies people carried and trusted. Camphor, laudanum, castor oil, peppermint sulphur, calomel mustard, plasters, liniments, tonics with names that sound half medical and half theatrical. A bottle can rattle in a wagon box for weeks and then suddenly become the centre of a family's hope. Whether it truly helps is another matter. 19th century medicine is often a little too enthusiastic and a little too vague, which is a dangerous combination when your patient is already weak. You watch one woman measure drops from a bottle with grave attention, while another steeps herbs in a tin cup, the steam carrying a bitter green smell into the morning air. Nearby, a man swears by a powder someone back in Missouri recommended. Another traveller dismisses that powder and recommends something stronger, fouler, and probably no more effective. People cling to what they know, what they were told, what worked once on a cousin or failed once on a neighbour. Science, tradition, superstition and desperation all sit rather close together on the trail. Sickness also interrupts the ordinary choreography of movement. A healthy wagon train has a rhythm by now. Rise, pack, yoke, walk, halt, walk, again camp, mend, sleep. Illness breaks that rhythm and demands rearrangement. Someone has to ride who usually walks, someone has to be watched, someone has to carry extra water, one family falls behind, another lends space in a wagon. Plans are adjusted with the weary flexibility that comes from having no better option. There is a continuing question among researchers over how much emigrants really understood about the causes of epidemic disease as they travelled. Germ theory was not yet guiding frontier practice, and many people blamed miasmas, bad air, heat overexertion, or general misfortune. Some practical measures, like avoiding foul water when possible, were known in a loose experiential way, even without modern explanation. Still, much about disease must have felt random, even vindictive. Drink from one stream and remain well. Drink from another and collapse by evening. It is enough to make the whole landscape seem untrustworthy. The camp today moves with that particular hush that surrounds a sickbed, even when the sickbed is only a pallet under canvas. Children are told not to crowd. Men step more softly than usual near one wagon. Women carry cloths, cups, and basins. The smell of coffee mingles with vinegar sweat, damp fabric, and the slightly metallic scent of fear. A person who is ill takes on a strange centrality, even when everyone tries to continue as normal attention keeps tugging back. You realise how exposed a body feels out here. At home, illness has walls around it, doors, a proper bed, familiar linens, a physician perhaps if one can be fetched. On the trail, a fever burns under canvas while dust blows under the wagon and oxen graze a few yards away. Privacy shrinks, comfort narrows. The sounds of ordinary camp life continue nearby, indifferent and necessary. A child laughs. A skillet scrapes. A wheel gets greased. Life does not pause simply because one body has become a crisis. And yet kindness grows very visible in these moments. A woman from another wagon brings broth without fanfare. A boy is sent to fetch the clearest water he can find and returns trying hard to look solemn and useful. A man who is clumsy with words offers to take over driving for the day. A teenage girl rocks a baby not her own so the mother can sit beside a sick husband. These acts do not erase danger, but they keep the camp human. A lesser-known note in some diaries is how often people feared the medicines almost as much as the disease. This is not entirely unfair. Calomel, for example, a mercury-based treatment used for various complaints, could be harsh and damaging. You can hardly blame emigrants for developing a complicated emotional relationship with the medicine chest. Imagine being weak with fever and then being offered a remedy that sounds like it was prepared by someone with a grudge. The road itself becomes heavier on illness knees. Those still walking lower their voices as if quiet feet might help. The sun still rises, the dust still lifts, the grass still waves in the wind, but all of it seems slightly farther away from the centre of attention. You notice the body in new ways, then not only your own but everyone's. The stoop of fatigue, the careful favouring of one leg, the child rubbing sore eyes, the old man taking a breath before each rise. A wagon train is a moving census of vulnerability. Some recover. That matters. A child with a fever sits up by evening. A man with stomach troubles manages broth the next day. A woman too weak to walk one afternoon returns to the road slowly 2 mornings later, pale but steady. Recovery on the trail can feel almost miraculous, though. Often it is simply the body stubbornly doing its work. The camp takes heart from these turning. Hope is contagious too, though blessedly less fatal. Others do not improve so neatly, and everyone knows it even before anyone says it aloud. That unspoken knowledge lingers at the edge of the firelight. It rides with the wagons, it stares into the stream where water is drawn, it settles in the pauses of conversation. The trail keeps teaching the same merciless idea in different forms. You can pack flour, spare axle, grease and coffee. You cannot pack certainty. By evening the sky softens to rose and amber, and camp forms again with weary precision. The healthy eat because they must. The sick are tended because they must. The animals graze because they must. Necessity is the great conductor of this whole rough orchestra. You sit near the low fire and listen to the tiny sounds around you. A spoon in a cup, a murmur behind canvas, the far cough of cattle, the flutter of flame in a breeze that has finally cooled. You are as tired in the deep trailway now, not just in muscle but in feeling. Illness does that. It reminds everyone that the road is not merely long, it is intimate. It presses against the skin, enters the lungs, tests the stomach, wears the joints and sometimes reaches deeper still. Walking daily on the Oregon Trail means living close to your own body and to the bodies of others, their strength, their weakness, their sudden changes. When you lie down, sleep does not come all at once. The night air touches your face through a gap in the canvas. Somewhere nearby, someone shifts on a blanket and sighs. Somewhere else, a low voice says, "Everything will be better tomorrow," and whether that is true or merciful hardly matters in the moment. The camp settles little by little, one sound at a time, and you feel the fragile fact of everyone breathing around you in the dark. Out here that alone can sound like grace. The graves appear gradually, which is somehow worse than if they arrived all at once. At first you almost miss them. A small rise in the earth near the trail, a few stones arranged with more intention than accident, a patch where the grass looks disturbed, though time and weather are already trying to smooth it back into the plain. Then you see another and another, and before long you understand that the road west is lined not only with wagon tracks and hoof prints, but with endings. The Oregon Trail does not hide what it costs. It leaves the evidence beside the path. Morning is quiet in a different way today. Not silent, because silence is rare in a moving camp, but subdued. The oxen still breathe and snort, chains still clink, fires still murmur under kettles, children still need feeding and boots still need tugging on. Yet there is a restraint in the voices, a softness at the edges. Perhaps it began with the sight of one fresh mound yesterday evening, or perhaps it has simply been building for days, but now every traveller seems more aware of the narrow line between walking beside the wagon and being left beneath the grass while others go on. Death on the Oregon Trail was no exaggeration invented later for effect. Thousands of emigrants died along overland routes from disease accidents, exposure and exhaustion. Cholera took many. So did drownings, injuries, and the ordinary wear of a journey that could grind down the strongest body. The exact numbers vary depending on the year, the route and the records consulted, but no honest portrait of trail life can omit the graves. They were part of the landscape emigrants saw with their own eyes. You pass one close enough to read what remains of a name scratched into wood. The letters are rough, the board already splitting a little, the soil around it pressed flat by weather. There is no facets, no tidy churchyard, no family plot enclosed by known landmarks. Just open country windgrass, and this one small claim that a person was here and was loved enough to be marked. The feeling that passes through you is hard to name. It is sorrow, certainly, but also proximity. The dead are not abstract anymore. They are at the roadside. The smell of the morning seems sharper when you notice graves. Sage damp, Soil, animal musk, smoke from breakfast fires, all of it enters the senses with an odd clarity, as though the world has stepped slightly closer. Even the wheel noise feels altered. The wagons roll on with their same practical creaking, yet now that sound has a faint hollow behind it because you know others heard it too and then heard it no more. There is a small haunting detail mentioned in some trail recollections. Families sometimes buried loved ones in or near the road itself, not from disrespect but to reduce the chance of wolves or other animals disturbing the grave. Passing wagon wheels could help disguise the fresh earth. It is a chillingly practical measure, and that practicality tells you everything about the conditions. Grief had to work quickly. Love had to cooperate with necessity. You imagine the labour of it. The halt called, the shovels taken down, the camp gathered in a subdued ring, perhaps a prayer, perhaps no formal words at all because no one can quite manage them. Earth turned with the aching arms after a day already full of work. Children hushed if such a thing is possible, a body wrapped in what could be spared, then the mound, the marker, the final look, and after that the terrible ordinary command of the trail move on. The journey does not stop because a family's world has. There is no agreement among historians about how often the emotional burden of these constant roadside burials shaped decisions to continue versus turn back, because diaries vary so much in what they confess. Some writers recorded grief openly. Others were curt, perhaps from shock, perhaps from privacy, perhaps because writing the full feeling would have made moving forward impossible. But the evidence suggests that people did what human beings often do under pressure. They mourned in fragments, a prayer now, tears later, memory carried while walking. You notice how differently travellers respond to the graves. Some avert their eyes after a brief glance as if looking too long might invite fate. Some stare openly, some remove hats, some keep talking with a strained brightness that says looking away is its own sort of shield. Children ask questions in voices that make adults pause before answering. Who is there? How old were they? Why did they die? The adult replies are careful and often incomplete. Death-like distance is hard to explain to a child without accidentally explaining it to yourself as well. A stranger thing happens too. After you have seen several graves, you begin to search for them. Not from morbid curiosity exactly, though perhaps a trace of that lives in everyone. More from heightened attention. A raised patch near the road. A board at an angle. Stones gathered in an unlikely place. The eye learns the signs. Once learned, they are difficult to unlearn. One lesser known aspect of trail burial practice is that markers were often temporary in the extreme. Wood-weathered names, faded animals, or storms disturbed the site, and many graves eventually became anonymous. Some emigrants copied inscriptions into diaries as a way of preserving them, almost like carrying a brief witness onward. There is something moving in that gesture, the choice to write down another family's sorrow, so it would not vanish entirely into grass and distance. The camp this evening carries the weight of these thoughts, though no one announces it formally. Supper is cooked, water is fetched. Children still quarrel over small injustices with unimpaired vigour. Yet the adults speak more gently around the fire. Someone tells a story from home, not loudly, just enough to draw the mind toward kitchens and porches and familiar cemeteries with fences and shade trees. The contrast hurts. A proper burial ground back east now seems like a wild luxury. You think too about memory. If a person dies on the trail, who keeps them alive afterward? A spouse, a child, a sister, a diary entry no longer than 3 lines. Perhaps a name in a family Bible once Oregon is reached. Perhaps nothing written at all, only a story told by firelight years later to someone who never saw the plains. There is such vulnerability in that, not only the body passing, but the possibility of being swallowed by the scale of the journey. Researchers continue to weigh how much the ever-present visibility of death shaped emigrants' religious feeling on the road. Some accounts suggest greater faith, more prayer, a sharper sense of providence. Others reveal anger numbness or a practical spirituality stripped of flourish. That range feels deeply believable. A grave at the roadside does not produce one uniform lesson. It presses on whatever belief, fear, or stubbornness already lives inside a person. The stars come out clean and sharp tonight, more numerous than seems fair over a road marked by so much loss. The sky pays no tribute, but perhaps that is not quite true. Perhaps its vastness is a form of witness, if not of comfort. The fire snaps softly. A woman hums while folding a blanket. A man stares into the coals with his hat in his hands. Somewhere beyond camp, the animals crop at the grass with steady little tearing sounds, completely faithful to the present moment. You lie down and the graves do not leave you. They settle into the mind beside the other. Trail truths now stored there. Mud dust, thirst, sickness, the patience of oxen, the labour of women, the quick games of children. Death joins the procession, not as a dramatic interruption, but as another companion walking a little way off to the side. That may be the hardest thing to accept. Loss here is not rare enough to remain extraordinary. It becomes part of the country. And still the wagons move. At dawn they will rise again, yoke up and take the track westward, while the mounds remain where they are held by earth and wind. You will walk past more of them before this journey ends. You know that now. The road teaches it plainly. But tonight, under the huge patient sky, the camp is still breathing. The fire is still warm, and everyone nearest you is still here. In a place like this that feels less like a small fact and more like the whole world. The forts arrive like rumours first. Someone says there will be one by tomorrow. Someone else insists tomorrow means 2 days. If the speaker is optimistic, 4 if he is honest. A child asks whether the fort will have candy, which feels ambitious but oddly admirable. By now you have learned that any fixed structure on this journey acquires an almost magical glow long before it appears. A roof that does not move, walls thicker than canvas, a storehouse, perhaps blacksmith tools, perhaps news, perhaps disappointment sold at inflated prices, usually all of the above. You walk through the morning with that faint current of anticipation running under the usual fatigue. The land itself still asks its ordinary questions. How hot will the day become? How far to water? Will the animals hold up? Is that wheel sounding different, or are you simply suspicious by nature now? But threaded through these concerns is the thought of arrival, however temporary. A post, a station, a trading place, and something anchored. When the fort finally comes into view, it does not look like a fairy tale. It looks practical, squared, sunstruck and busy. Wooden walls, low roofs, coral stacks of goods men moving about with the focused indifference of people who have seen too many wagon trains to be impressed by one more. Yet to your trail-worn eyes it might as well be a palace. The smell changes before you reach it. Less wild grass and oxen, more cut timber. Smoke anima concentrated in one place, old leather, and the faint stored scent of grain or flour. The human world feels denser here. Trading posts and forts were crucial waypoints along overland routes. They offered blacksmithing repairs, some provisions and mail exchange in certain cases, and above all information though. Information on the trail was always a slippery commodity. This is one of the clearest realities of the journey. Such places could mean relief, but never pure relief. They were lifelines, markets, gossip mills and bottlenecks all at once. You did not simply arrive and receive comfort. You entered a rough economy shaped by scarcity, distance and opportunity. The first sensation is noise. Hammers ringing from a smithy. Horses shifting in corrals, men calling over prices, wagon wheels grinding into the yard, dogs barking as if they personally run the establishment. Women speaking quickly while unpacking a list of needs held in memory for days. Children staring everywhere at once. After so much open country, the concentration of bodies, goods, voices and odours feels almost overwhelming. Civilization, even in this frontier form, is loud. A smaller but telling detail from emigrant accounts is how often travellers were shocked by prices at these posts. Flour coffee, sugar nails, cloth feed repairs. Everything could cost far more than back east for reasons that were perfectly understandable and deeply offensive when you were the one paying. Distance had to be accounted for, supply lines were uncertain, demand was high. None of this made handing over money feel any sweeter. The frontier has always known how to monetize urgency. You stand near a wagon while someone from your party goes to inquire about axle grease and perhaps a bit of coffee if any remains within the realm of decency. The sun beats down on the yard. Flies work industriously around the animals. Dust hangs in the air with the smell of manure and forge smoke. Nearby, a woman inspects bolts of coarse fabric with the intensity of someone evaluating both household future and personal dignity. Another traveller clutches a letter received from the east and reads it again immediately, then once more slowly, as though the paper itself might contain more comfort with each pass of the eyes. Mail when it appeared could change the emotional weather of a whole company. A note from home news past westward, or even just the sight of handwriting from a familiar hand, might make the trail feel connected again to the life left behind. Of course, bad news could travel too, or no news at all, which is its own kind of ache. Out here, information is never neutral. It arrives carrying hope, dread, memory, and the exact weight of what cannot be changed. There is also repair work, and it has its own gravity. Men crowd around smithies and wagon parts with the seriousness normally reserved for surgeons. A cracked tyre, a loose hub, a broken chain, a failing tongue. Such things cannot be charmed into usefulness. They need iron fire skill and time. You watch a blacksmith work bare-armed, in the heat hammer lifting and falling in bright rhythm while sparks jump like brief orange insects. The sound cuts through the fortyard with clean authority. For a moment it seems the most reassuring sound in the world. There remains real debate among historians about how far these forts functioned as genuine support systems versus opportunistic businesses that profited from emigrants' vulnerability. The answer, unsurprisingly, is both. A post could save a journey by repairing a wagon or selling needed supplies. It could also strip a family's purse to the bottom doing so. Relief and exploitation are not always opposites. On the trail, they often arrived hand in hand and asked for exact payment. Rumour gathers even faster than trade. Someone says the river crossings ahead are lower this year. Another insists disease has broken out farther west. One man swears grass is failing on the next stretch. A woman says her cousin heard of a shortcut. Everyone listens, filters, repeats, amends. The air itself seems full of half-verified futures. To stand at a fort is to step briefly into an information storm where certainty remains stubbornly out of stock. You hear languages and accents from different regions, perhaps even different countries, braided together in the yard. Eastern farmers, mountain men, traders, teamsters, missionaries, children, labourers, all orbiting the same practical centre. The Oregon Trail was never one single social type moving west in an orderly line. It was a mingling of classes, backgrounds, ambitions and habits forced into temporary proximity by the geography of movement. Forts make that mixture obvious in a way the open road sometimes disguises. One odd little feature of fort life mentioned in some reminiscences is the almost theatrical importance of fresh bread pies or other baked food when available. After weeks of rough fare, the sight or smell of proper baking could unsteady even sensible adults. You can believe that instantly. Imagine dust in your hair, bacon monotony in your soul, and then the aroma of something warm, yeasted, and humanly unnecessary. It would feel less like food and more like revelation, also probably unaffordable revelation. Children react to the post with open fascination. A tethered animal becomes a spectacle. A stack of trade goods becomes mystery. A man in unfamiliar clothing becomes a story for later. They press clothes, get called back, wander again, and stare at everything as though the fort has been placed here solely for their examination. Adults, meanwhile, perform arithmetic in their heads. What is needed most? What can be spared? What can be traded? What must be done without? By afternoon, the glow has dimmed a little, as all real places dim once practicalities begin. Prices bite, repairs take time, news conflicts. The fort is still welcome, but it is no paradise. It smells too strongly of commerce for that, and the road is still waiting outside the walls. You begin to see these places for what they are. Not rescue exactly. Intervals, points where the long thread of movement knots briefly around timber iron and exchange before pulling loose again. When the wagons roll out at last, the departure carries a different mood from leaving camp. People are restocked where possible, patched where necessary, unsettled by rumour and perhaps a little strengthened by the sight of roofs and walls. The animals seem no more sentimental about it than before. The road resumes, wheels bite dust again, grass opens ahead, yet something from the fort goes with you. New nails in a box, a repaired chain, a letter tucked into a pocket, a warning in the mind, a price still stinging in memory. Evening finds the train back in the open country cooking supper, under the usual sky, as if the little burst of frontier bustle had been a dream. But the talk around the fires turns again and again to what was seen and heard. Prices judged outrageous, a blacksmith praised, a rumour dismissed and then reconsidered, a scrap of news from home repeated until every listener knows it by heart. These places matter because they remind you the trail is not endless emptiness. It is a corridor of contact, however uneasy, between movement and settlement hope, and market need and negotiation. The fire sinks lower. Beyond its glow the prairie lies calm and unreadable. Somewhere ahead another post may wait or not for many days. Either way, tomorrow you will walk on carrying more than abundant flour and tools. You will carry all the voices gathered at the fort, the warnings, bargains, repairs, and small brief proof that even on a road built of distance, human beings are forever trying to trade their way toward a little certainty. The mountains do not appear all at once, they gather at the edge of sight first, faint and bluish, like a thought the land has been keeping from you. For days the horizon has been mostly horizontal promise grass and sky negotiating their old arrangement. But now there is a rise to the world, a lifting, a darkening, a slow revelation of stone and timber and distance, stacked upward instead of merely outward. You feel it before you fully understand it. The air changes. The light sharpens. Even your own thoughts seem to stand up straighter and look ahead. At first, the sight is almost exhilarating. After so much plain, so much long-rolling sameness of steppe and dust and horizon. The mountains seem dramatic in the exact way the human imagination likes best. They break the line. They give the eye something to climb. Children point, adults stop mid-sentence. Someone removes a hat and squints as though politeness is required before scenery of such ambition. For a little while everyone feels the thrill of nearing what once seemed impossibly far. Then the practical mind catches up. Higher country does not mean only beauty. It means grades, colder nights, thinner foraging, in some stretches rougher footing, and the dawning realization that a wagon is less a vehicle now than a stubborn box you are trying to drag over a series of bad ideas made of rock. The trail has trained you to mistrust first impressions, and rightly so. A noble silhouette at a distance can turn into a week of sore legs and muttered resentment once you reach it. A plain point from the historical record belongs here. As emigrants moved farther west, mountain travel became one of the great tests of the journey. Steeper inclines, narrow passes, rough descents, and changing weather could slow progress dramatically and strain both people and livestock. By the time many wagon trains neared the higher country, bodies were already worn and supplies diminished. The mountains did not greet fresh travellers full of spring energy. They greeted people who had already spent months being walked thin. Morning in this country tastes different. The air is cooler, almost startling on the tongue after the hot plains. Pine begins to edge into the smell of grass and dust. Water runs clearer and some streams colder too, with that metallic stony freshness that makes your teeth ache pleasantly. The ground underfoot changes in texture. Less forgiving earth, more stones, more roots. More little surprises for ankles that were already filing complaints. The wheels sound different as well. They knock jar and protest against rougher surfaces. A wagon never stops speaking. It merely changes accents. The animals feel the change. Oxen lower their heads and work into climbs with greater visible effort, muscles drawing under hide breath, coming harder on the steeper pulls. Men walk closer to the teams, now watching wheels, checking loads, judging angles. Women tighten bundles, quiet children, and keep an eye on anything inside the wagons that might shift when the road tilts. Everyone seems to become more alert, as though the landscape itself has raised its voice and called the room to order. One small but memorable detail from trail accounts is how often emigrants shed possessions along the route, especially before difficult mountain stretches. What seemed worth carrying in Missouri could become absurd by the time steep grades entered the picture. Chests, furniture, heavy tools, even treasured keepsakes might be abandoned when the arithmetic of survival turned ruthless again. The mountains had a talent for clarifying the difference between beloved and necessary. Necessity kept winning, though not without tears. You pass scattered remnants sometimes, a broken chair, bits of iron, a chest with one side split. The remains of somebody else's decision lying out in grass or brush. They feel strangely intimate. A cast-off object tells a story without bothering to explain itself. Perhaps the family had no choice. Perhaps they argued for an hour. Perhaps a child cried over that very trunk. Perhaps a woman ran her fingers over it once and then turned away because the team could not take another pound. The trail leaves these little archaeology lessons everywhere for those willing to read them. There is also the question of timing, and timing in mountain country has teeth. Everyone knows or claims to know that winter must be beaten. Snow in the passes can trap a train or force desperate choices, and by now the calendar travels with you, almost like a second sun, invisible but always felt. A warm afternoon may still carry an undercurrent of hurry simply because the season is inching onward. You begin to understand how a date can become physical. It lives in the body as pressure. Researchers still examine just how much seasonal urgency shaped decision-making in the final western stretches, because diaries show a mix of caution and haste that could shift from one week to the next. Some companies pressed hard, others slowed from fatigue damage or illness, and then found themselves haunted by the calendar. There was no perfect balance. Push too hard and break a wagon or a team, move too slowly and risk the snows. It is the sort of choice the trail loves best, where every option carries a shadow. The weather plays its own games as you climb gradually into higher country. Days may still warm nicely, but evenings bite sooner. Shadows lengthen faster under ridges and trees. A breeze that would have been welcome on the plains now slips under damp collars and makes you reach for an extra layer. Campfires feel more important again. Smoke hangs in colder pockets of air. Blankets are shaken out with more gratitude. Even the coffee seems to rise from the cup with a richer scent when the air around it is crisp. Pine woods bring a different soundscape too. The open plains had wind insects, distant animal noise, and the wide carrying quality of open ground. Here the world becomes more enclosed, more textured. Branches hiss overhead. Birds call from unseen places. Water talks over stones. Wagon wheels crunch on gravel or knocked against roots. Voices do not float away so easily but bounce and catch among the trees. It feels at times like stepping from a giant hall into a narrow room. The beauty is undeniable. Sunlight stripes the ground through tall trunks. Clear streams flash between stones, distant ridges fade one behind another in soft blue ranks. Meadows open suddenly between darker stands of timber and look almost staged, like nature trying too hard to charm you. For a minute, standing with sore feet and dust still in the seams of your clothes, you might even think the reward has finally caught up with the effort. Then a wheel slips on a rock, an ox stumbles. Somebody shouts, and the mountain reminds you it is not scenery alone. You are beginning to notice how quickly labour intensifies on any incline. Even a modest rise demands more from everyone. Men shoulder wheels from behind. Women walk with arms full. because fewer things can safely jolt in the wagon bed. Children are warned more sharply. Rest halts become shorter and more strategic. No one wants to lose momentum on a climb. The body learns to ration itself in new ways. Save breath here, brace there, step around that stone. Do not waste strength on needless talk. A curious practice appears more often too. On hard slopes, families may unload portions of the wagon temporarily and carry items by hand or make extra efforts to lighten the burden for the team. The image is almost comic at first glance. A whole household in motion with kettles, sacks and bedding redistributed into human arms. But the comedy fades when you imagine doing it after months on the road. Every climb becomes a lesson in cooperation or a punishment for the lack of it. As the day wanes, the light takes on that mounting clarity that makes every tree edge and ridge line appear etched. Camp settles in a place chosen as much for practicality as comfort. Level enough groundwater nearby, forage if possible, shelter from wind if fortune is feeling charitable. Fires catch more quickly with thumb-dry wood around, and the smell of pine smoke folds into the evening. It is a cleaner scent than the smoke of the plane, somehow sharper and sweeter, and it seems to settle into your clothes with the authority of a season changing. Around the fire, conversation turns naturally to what lies ahead. Which pass? How steep? How many days? Whether a certain descent is truly as bad as reported? Whether there is better grazing beyond the next ridge? Whether the snows come early in these parts? No one can quite stop counting time now. Hope remains certainly, because Oregon is no longer a word floating in the abstract. It is drawing nearer. But hope now wears a work face. It has dirt under its nails and a nervous eye on the mountains. When you lie down that night, the air is cold enough to make the blankets feel briefly luxurious. Above you, through a gap in the canvas or between dark tree limbs, the stars burn hard and bright. The mountains are close now, no longer rumour, no longer painted distance. They stand around you in the dark, immense and patient, waiting for morning. And you know with full trail honesty that tomorrow they will ask more of your legs than today did, and more the day after that. Still, you will rise and walk toward them, because that is what this journey has made of everyone. Step by step, burden by burden, into higher and harder country. By the time you reach the Blue Mountains, you no longer think of the trail as a line on a map. You think of it as a series of bodily negotiations. How much can the oxen pull? How steep a descent can your knees survive without mutiny? How long can a wagon wheel remain trustworthy while bouncing over stone root and washout? The Blue Mountains rise ahead, not with the theatrical grandeur of a painting, but with the tired authority of something that has stopped many cheerful assumptions before you arrived. They are beautiful, yes, but beauty here has the severe sort of face that does not smile back. Morning enters the trees in narrow shafts, cool and pale, striking wagon covers, damp grass, and the shoulders of people already awake. Pine smoke from the breakfast fire hangs in the chill air. Somewhere nearby, water runs over rocks with a clean, hurried sound that almost makes you believe the day will be manageable. Then the first steep stretch begins, and the mountain immediately clarifies its position on optimism. The Blue Mountains, crossed by many Oregon Trail emigrants in the final western stages, were among the hardest portions of the trip. The terrain could be rugged, the grades exhausting the descents, punishing on wagons, livestock, and nerves alike. Travellers who had already come hundreds upon hundreds of miles often met this stretch, when their supplies, animals, and patience were all running low. In other words, the mountains had a talent for arriving precisely when everyone was least prepared to enjoy them. The climb itself is slow awkward, sur work. Wheels bump over exposed roots, stones shift under boots. The wagon leans just enough now and then to make everyone walk closer on the uphill side without needing to discuss it. Men brace wheels with shoulders and hands when the track narrows. Women carry smaller bundles rather than let them jolt loose in the bed. Children are told again and again to keep clear and do exactly as asked, which children sometimes do, and sometimes interpret as a philosophical suggestion. The forest has its own smell here, richer and darker than the open country behind you. Pine needles crushed underfoot, damp bark, cold earth, a faint sweetness from sun-warmed sap. The air feels close in the trees, though, cooler, and every sound has more texture. Wheels scrape, harness chains clink, oxen grunt with effort. A shouted warning does not vanish into the sky as it did on the plains, but rebounds off trunks and slopes, making the whole place seem more crowded with urgency. One small but vivid feature of mountain travel appears in many recollections. Emigrants often had to lock wheels, drag chains, or use ropes to control wagons on steep descents. The wagon was not merely pulled downhill, it had to be restrained, coaxed, checked, sometimes practically argued with. Gravity, as it turns out, was not a silent partner in the enterprise. It was an aggressive participant with very firm opinions. You see that clearly by midday when the trail tips downward in earnest. Climbs are tiring, but descents are unnerving in a different way. A climb asks strength. A descent asks control, and control feels more fragile. The wagon presses forward behind the team with a heavy, relentless intention that makes everyone alert. Wheels skid. Locked rims grind against dirt and stone with a harsh, scraping cry. Men hold ropes, taut boots sliding in the soil. The oxen plant themselves and descend it with maddening, admirable caution. Nobody breathes fully until the angle eases. There is a sort of raw comedy in the way human dignity suffers on these slopes. Fine speeches, family pride, all the polished confidence a person may have packed in Missouri. None of it matters much when you're half sliding beside a wagon, with your backside full of pine needles and your hat somewhere behind you on the track. The mountain strips performance from people with almost artistic efficiency. It is difficult to look grand while clinging to a wheel spoke and asking the Almighty for one less inch of slope. At the same time, this stretch reveals competence beautifully. You notice who keeps calm, who sees trouble early, who ties a rope properly, who knows where to stand and where absolutely not to stand. Experience appears not as bragging, but as steadiness. The people who frightened you least on the plains are often the most reassuring here. They do not say much. They simply move well and notice everything. There is no single agreement among historians about which specific segment of the western route emigrants found most psychologically draining, because conditions varied by season, weather, guide choice, and memory. Yet many accounts of the Blue Mountains carry a distinctive tone, part awe, part fatigue, part irritation sharpened by the knowledge that Oregon is near enough to imagine and still hard enough to earn. Nearness can be cruel that way. It sweetens hope and makes every delay feel personal. The trees can be both comfort and obstruction. After the exposed plain, shade feels merciful. The air is cooler. The light flickers beautifully across the track. Birdsong threads through the branches. Then the path narrows. Roots trip the unwary and wagon tongues threaten to catch on every badly placed trunk. You begin to understand that every landscape offers kindness with one hand and inconvenience with the other. A curious detail from some emigrant reports is how quickly mountain roads could become littered with broken bits of wagons, abandoned goods, or evidence of hasty repairs. A split spoke here, a bent hoop there, a scrap of cloth tied around something temporarily mended. It gives the trail a faintly battered look, as though all who pass through leave a little testimony in wood and iron. These scraps are not only trash, they are proof of effort, of crisis, of people improvising one more solution because the only alternative was stopping. Watercourses crisscross the route more often here, some just quick little streams, others muddy enough to make the footing ugly again. Boots stay damp longer, ankles twist more easily on hidden stones. The simple act of walking dali, which on the plains became repetitive, now becomes technical. Where to place the foot, how to balance on a side slope, how to descend without letting your toes ram the front of your shoes so hard you begin mentally drafting a complaint to the inventor of footwear. Children are quieter in the hardest stretches. Even the lively ones sense when the road deserves respect. They cling closer, carry what they can, and stare wide-eyed at wheels edging past stumps or dropping into ruts. Yet the moment camp is made on a gentler patch, they bounce back with almost suspicious speed, collecting cones, poking sticks into the fire and asking whether tomorrow will be easier. Adults answer with that special trail murmur that means, perhaps, perhaps not, let us all avoid making promises. Food tastes different after mountain labour. Not better exactly, though hunger can flatter almost anything. More deserve, perhaps, beans, bacon, coarse bread, coffee. All of it feels anchored in the body after a day spent bracing, climbing, lifting and concentrating. Smoke rises through pine branches into a sky turning glassy and pale. The evening chill comes faster here, slipping down the slopes, while there is still light caught high above in the treetops. You sit near the fire and feel every joint reporting in, knees, ankles, shoulders, hands, back. The whole body has become a committee of opinion. Around you, others sit with the same exhausted stillness, speaking in low tones about the road behind and the road ahead. Which descent was worst? Whether the left wheel sounded odd? How far to easier ground? Whether the teams can stand another day like this? Oregon feels close enough now to taste and conversation. That makes these hard miles almost more trying, not less. You're near the end, which means you are near the point where people are most likely to overestimate what remains in them. Night in the mountains feels enclosed but not oppressive. Dark trunks stand beyond the firelight like watchful pillars. Somewhere an animal shifts in the brush. The stream keeps talking softly over stones. The stars appear in fragments through breaks in the branches, fewer than on the plains, but somehow more intimate. You lie down with the smell of pine smoke in your clothes and the memory of steep grades still alive in your legs. The Blue Mountains have done what difficult country always does. They've reduced the journey again to basics. Balance, patience, strength, cooperation, a good rope, a sound wheel, a team that keeps pulling. Tomorrow there will be more of the same, perhaps with better ground, perhaps not. But tonight you have crossed another hard piece of the continent on foot, beside a wagon that did not quite betray you, and on this road that counts as a very respectable kind of victory. By this stage of the journey, food is no longer simply food. It is mood, memory measurement, argument, reassurance, disappointment and arithmetic, all boiled together in a kettle that probably could use a better scrubbing. You've walked far enough now that every meal carries a little calculation behind it. How much flour remains, how many pounds of bacon, whether the coffee can be stretched, whether those beans were meant for now or for a week from now, when things may be worse. Hunger on the trail is rarely theatrical at first. It is more intimate than that. It begins as a constant awareness, a narrowing of the imagination toward whatever can be eaten, softened, fried, boiled, raw, or stubbornly chewed. Morning starts with the smell of something plain. It might be bread warmed from yesterday, or mush stirred into a pot, or bacon if fortune has chosen to behave. The scent should be comforting, and it is to a point. Yet by now, even comfort has repetition in it. Smoke from the fire catches in your throat. Coffee lifts its dark, bitter promise into the cool air. A skillet hisses, tin cups knock softly together. You can almost predict the taste before it reaches your mouth, and this body still leans toward it with gratitude because walking daily has made appetite more practical than fancy. One of the clearest realities of the Oregon Trail is that emigrants depended heavily on staple foods packed at the beginning of the trip, especially flour, bacon, beans, rice, coffee, sugar and salt. Fresh food was limited and uncertain, so trail diets could become monotonous very quickly. This is not one of those details that later storytelling improves much, because there is only so much poetry one can squeeze from yet another serving of beans without becoming suspicious of the poet. Still, monotony does not mean ease. Even plain food takes labour. Flour must be protected from damp. Bacon must be watched for spoilage. Fires must be lit in wind or rain or with poor fuel. Dough must be mixed in bowls that never seem fully clean. Water must be fetched and sometimes boiled. A meal on the trail is never just the meal. It is the whole chain of tasks leading up to it, all performed by tired people with dusty hands and limited patience. By now the stores are shrinking and everyone knows it, whether anyone says so openly or not. Sacks feel lighter when lifted. Barrels echo differently. Coffee grounds are used once then, perhaps again, with hopeful dishonesty. Sugar becomes more carefully rationed. Salt matters more. The cheerful generosity of early camp life, when an extra biscuit might be passed without much thought, has narrowed into caution. Not meanness exactly. Prudence with a spoon. There is a little human truth in the way people talk about food when it grows scarce. Memories get extravagant. A pie from home becomes practically mythical. Butter acquires spiritual qualities. Fresh milk sounds like a fairy tale. One traveller describes peaches with such tenderness that you would think he were recalling lost love. This kind of conversation appears often in trail recollections, and it makes perfect sense. The mind deprived of variety becomes a connoisseur of memory. A good dinner back east can glow for months in the imagination once supper becomes another round of salt pork and coarse bread. Hunting offers the possibility of relief, though not always the reality. There are stretches where game can supplement the stores and fresh meat can change the temper of a whole camp. Buffalo earlier. On the plains, perhaps deer, perhaps smaller game when luck and conditions allow. But trail hunting is not a dependable grocery service. Men go out hopeful and return triumphant or return philosophical, which is the trail form of admitting they have brought back nothing at all. Even success creates work. Meat must be butchered, cooked, maybe dried if possible, and everyone grows suddenly opinionated about the best use of it. There is also the matter of what hunger does to taste. Food you would have dismissed at home can become deeply satisfying after a hard day of walking. A burnt biscuit may still feel wonderful if eaten hot. Greasy bacon may seem glorious if there has been no fresh meat for weeks. Even a thin stew, if warm and salted, can quiet the body in a way that feels almost luxurious. Hardship lowers the threshold for delight in very democratic ways. Not every improvisation is thrilling. Some are merely earnest. Accounts from the trail mention people making do with whatever they had left, combining flour and water into rough cakes, stretching beans with bits of meat using wild greens when they knew how to identify them, or turning scraps into something that was technically supper, even if nobody wrote a sonnet to it. Trail cooking was less about cuisine than survival, with seasoning as a side thought. There is an open question among historians about how nutritionally adequate most emigrant diets really were over the full course of the journey, because the answer changed with wealth, planning, luck, weather, and access to trade or game. Some families prepared relatively well and supplemented effectively. Others faced long, hungry stretches, especially when supplies spoiled or animals weakened. What seems clear is that by the later stages, many travellers were operating on thinner margins than they had imagined back in Missouri, both in provisions and in bodily reserves. Midday meals, if that term is not too grand, are often brief and functional. Bread, bacon, cold beans, maybe coffee if the stop is long enough and fuel easy enough to manage. Often it is less a meal than a pause in being hungry. People eat leaning against wheels, sitting on boxes, crouching in sparse shade. Children complain. Adults tell them to chew. A woman scrapes the last of something from a pot with the concentration of a jeweller collecting gold filings. Waste has become offensive in principle. One oddly vivid tidbit from some overland diaries is the frequency with which emigrants discussed food disasters in memorable detail. Bread that would not rise, flour gone wormy, bacon turned rancid, a pot tipped into the dirt. These domestic catastrophes could achieve near epic status in recollection, which is entirely understandable. On the trail, a ruined meal is not a small annoyance. It is a blow to morale, order, and tomorrow's planning. Lose one pot of supper, and suddenly the whole evening feels personally insulted. The body tells the truth too. People move differently when food runs low, steps shorten, irritability sharpens, faces look more drawn. Children become either droopy or ferociously whiny with little middle ground. Adults begin claiming they are not hungry when they plainly are, which is usually either politeness or denial, sometimes both. The road feels longer on an underfed body. Hills become more insulting. Carrying water seems less like a task and more like a personal grievance filed by gravity. And yet there are bright moments. Someone trades at a post for a little flour better than expected. Someone catches fish. Someone has been quietly saving dried fruit and brings it out for a sick child or a Sunday treat. A woman produces preserves from a jar wrapped deep in the wagon, and the entire camp regards her as if she has performed a miracle with sugar. These small surprises matter out of all proportion to their size. A spoonful of sweetness can restore something beyond calories. It can restore civilization briefly. Even the ritual of sharing continues, though with more care. A piece of meat slipped to a neighbour whose husband is ill. A cup of coffee carried to an older woman too tired to rise at once. A mother pretending not to want the larger portion so a child can have it. Generosity on the trail becomes finer-grained when abundance fades. It is less feast, more gesture, but sometimes the gesture weighs more. By evening supper, fires cast their familiar warm glow on faces leaner and wearier than when the journey began. The smell drifting from kettles is simple, smoky, salty, maybe gamey if the day has gone well. You sit with your tin plate and eat slowly, feeling the hunger settle but not disappear. The fire pops. Someone sighs from a very deep place. Someone else jokes that beans have become a religious principle. No one laughs quite as hard as the joke deserves, but they do laugh. You begin to understand that scarcity alters time. Meals no longer divide the day merely by habit, they mark reassurance. Breakfast means you had enough left to begin properly. Midday means the body can keep going. Supper means you survived another stretch and still have something warm before dark. The trail pares life down to such old essentials that eating starts to feel ceremonial again, not in elegance, but in significance. Night comes on cool and quiet. Cups are rinsed. Pots are scraped clean enough to suggest respect for tomorrow. The smell of smoke clings to everything, including the food itself. Around you the camp settles, some full enough to sleep without thinking of breakfast, others already projecting themselves into morning hunger. You lie down with the taste of salt and ash still faintly in your mouth and think how strange it is that something as ordinary as supper can become the emotional centre of a day. But that's what life was really like out here while walking daily. Not just spectacular danger or grand landscape. Also the plain hard business of keeping bodies going with dwindling stores, stub and skill, and the occasional blessing of fresh meat or hidden preserves. Tomorrow the road will ask for more strength, and tonight's meal, humble as it was, must somehow answer on your behalf. By now the trail has crept into your clothes so thoroughly that it no longer feels like something outside you. It is on you and you rubbed into the seams of garments, ground into boot leather, tangled in hair, dried on skin, stitched into blankets and tucked under fingernails with a loyalty no friend could match. If the road earlier was something you walked through, it has become something you wear. Daily life on the Oregon Trail is not only motion and hardship, it is texture. Scratchy, gritty, smoky, sticky, blistered texture. Morning begins with cloth against skin and the first sensation is seldom kind. Your shirt or shift is stiff in places where sweat dried yesterday. Wool prickles. A seam you did not notice at home has become a sworn enemy by the third week of constant walking. Stockings, if they are dry, feel like a blessing. If they are not, they feel like an argument you are too tired to finish. You pull on shoes or boots already shaped by the memory of your feet, and before you have taken 10 steps you can feel every old sore introducing itself again. One of the plain realities of the overland journey is that emigrants wore the same limited clothing for long stretches washing when watertime weather and energy allowed. Clothes had to endure dust, sweat, rain, smoke, mud, and constant wear often, with little chance for proper repair or replacement. Modern people tend to imagine the past as vaguely uncomfortable in a decorative sort of way. The trail corrects that illusion with savage efficiency. Fabric can be heavy, damp, abrasive, hot and awkward all at once, which is impressive in a grim sort of way. Women's skirts catch burrs and brush, men's trouser hems collect dust and mud in equal loyalty. Aprons become useful records of the day, carrying traces of flour, soot, grease and water in overlapping episodes. Jackets smell of smoke so persistently that even after a rare wash they seem to remember the fires. Bonnets protect the face from sun, but they trap heat and sweat round the head. Hats help too, though less when the wind chooses to turn them into comedy. Then there are the feet, those long-suffering beasts of burden, beneath the rest of you. Walking daily means feet matter in a way that later stories often glide past. Blisters, swollen ankle, rubbed heels, split, skin, bruised toes from steep descents. All of it becomes ordinary conversation. People compare remedies with the seriousness of physicians. Grease this, wrap that, rest when you can, loosen the laces, dry the stockings by the fire if they are not already busy smelling like old smoke and disappointment. A sound foot is worth more out here than many finer possessions. A small but vivid detail preserved in many recollections is the constant irritation of dust mixing with sweat and settling under collars, waistbands and stockings. That combination creates a kind of living sandpaper effect which sounds minor until it has been your companion for 10 hours. The body on the trail is always being abraded gently but persistently by weather movement and cloth. Misery does not always arrive dramatically. Sometimes it merely rubs. Cleanliness becomes a moving target rather than a stable condition. You wash when you can. Face, hands, maybe neck, maybe feet if water is plentiful and the camp is not too rushed. A fuller wash feels almost ceremonial when it happens. Cold stream water shocking your skin awake, soap biting at chapped hands, the sudden astonishing sight of your own actual complexion beneath a layer of dust. Then naturally the next day the road starts repainting you immediately. The trail is deeply committed to continuity. Hair has its own little saga. It catches smoke, wind, burrs, grease, and the general atmosphere of camp life. Braids help. Bonnets help a bit. Combs help if you still have patience, and if the comb itself has not been misplaced under bedding flour sacks, or one of the 12 other things that seem always to migrate in a wagon. Children's hair in particular becomes a battlefield of knot straw and wild ingenuity. A mother standing in camp trying to drag a comb through her daughter's tangled hair while both of them are half soot-striped may be one of the truest images of civilization on the move. There is a continuing question among historians about how much emigrants consciously tried to maintain standards of appearance versus gradually surrendering to trail necessity. Diaries suggest both impulses at once. People often wanted to remain tidy, respectable and recognizable to themselves, especially on Sundays or at forts. At the same time, the road constantly imposed limits. Respectability could be dusted over by noon and soaked through by evening. Dignity had to become more flexible than fashion magazines generally recommend. Skin suffers quietly, sun darkens it, wind roughens it, and constant contact with rough cloth or tools leaves hands and wrists nicked, reddened and hardened. Lips crack in dry stretches, faces burn, necks peel. Chafing under arms, at waistbands and along thighs turns walking into a negotiation between progress and discomfort. Yet the body adapts too. Palms toughen, shoulders strengthen, legs settle into the repeated labour. You are not becoming comfortable exactly, you are becoming trail-shaped. One odd and slightly comic point that turns up in some accounts is how precious a small amount of toilet soap, scent or other grooming item could become. Imagine having crossed rivers, plains and mountains and still feeling uplifted by a tiny scrap of lavender soap or a careful brushing of hair before evening. It might sound frivolous from a distance. Up close it sounds like morale management. A person who smells briefly less like oxen and wood smoke may find life worth continuing for at least another afternoon. Laundry, when it happens, remains one of the great exhausting miracles. Shirts, shifts, stockings, baby cloths, aprons, all must be scrubbed, wrung and dried somehow. Water may be cold, soap may be harsh, drying conditions may be laughable. Dust may settle on the garments before you can blink twice. Still it must be done. Clean cloth against tired skin is not a luxury for long, it is prevention, comfort and sanity stitched together. You notice too how clothing becomes biography. Torn knees tell of a stumble on rock. A ripped sleeve tells of a snagged wagon part or hasty work around brush. Grease marks near a cuff show who helped at the wheels. Smoke scent that never leaves speaks of every campfire endured. A patch sewn in a hurry by firelight carries one evening's fatigue with it for the rest of the journey. By the end, what you wear is not merely worn out, it is narrated. Evening often brings the most intimate relief. Shoes off, that first moment alone can feel almost spiritual. Dust shaken from stockings, feet rubbed, damp cloth wiped over a face. A child scrubbed just enough to reveal ears again. Someone laughing at the line of dirt left behind by a bonnet ribbon. Someone else holding a boot up to the firelight as though it has committed a personal betrayal. Camp after a long day is full of these tiny bodily reckonings, all of them homely, all of them immensely important. You begin to grasp that physical discomfort on the trail is not separate from the emotional life of the journey. When people are gritty, sore, overheated and underwashed tempers shorten, when someone manages a wash, amended hem-dry stockings, or a few blessed minutes with bare feet and cool grass, the spirit rises in proportion. The body sets the tone. It always has. The trail simply refuses to let anyone ignore the fact. As darkness gathers, the firelight softens the harshest evidence. Smoke scent becomes almost pleasant in the cool air. Dust turns golden on wagon covers and sleeves. Faces look gentler once the sun is off them. You sit there in trail-worn clothes, skin, still carrying the memory of the day's heat and friction, and feel the odd mixture of degradation and endurance that the journey produces. You're dirty, yes, uncomfortable certainly, yet also more aware than ever of being alive in a body that has carried you this far. When you lie down, the blankets feel rough but familiar. Your shoulders ease, your feet throb in a dull, honest rhythm. Somewhere nearby, a garment flaps on a line in the night breeze, not quite dry yet. Somewhere else, someone is still darning by low firelight. Tomorrow the dust will settle again, the smoke will cling again, the cloth will rub again. But tonight your shoes are off. The worst of the grime has been argued with, and the body that has borne the trail all day is finally allowed to be still. Then, almost without warning, the land begins to soften. Not all at once, and not in a way that lets anyone relax too early, because the trail has trained you better than that. But little signs begin gathering. The air carries more moisture. The grass looks richer. Trees seem less like isolated favours, and more like part of the ordinary order of things. Water appears more often and not always as a threat. The whole country starts to hint that somewhere ahead the journey may finally change from getting there to being there, though those two states are not nearly as different as hopeful people once imagined in Missouri. You walk into this greener country with a strange mixture of relief and suspicion. Relief because your eyes starve for softer colours after so much dust stone glare, and weary repetition almost ache at the sight of thick grass-shaded water and broader stands of timber. Suspicion because nothing on this road has come without a price, and part of you now assumes every lovely view is simply waiting for the right moment to produce a broken axle, a steep drop or a muddy crossing, disguised as pastoral charm. Still, the first impression is powerful. After plains and mountains strain, the promise of the Willamette Valley settles over the imagination like cool water over a fevered cloth. This was one of the great magnets drawing emigrants west in the first place. Reports of fertile soil, milder climate, and productive farmland in Oregon country circulated widely and helped fuel overland migration. That promise was not purely fantasy. Many travellers did reach a region capable of supporting farms, orchards, and settlements in ways that seemed astonishing after the privations of the road. The scent of the place changes your mood before your thoughts can organise it. Damp earth, leaf mould, river air, crushed green growth underfoot. The smoke from campfires seems gentler here somehow, folding into the surrounding moisture instead of hanging harsh and dry. Even the soundscape feels fuller. Bird song is livelier. Water speaks more often. Wind moves through leaves instead of only over grass. After months of broad exposure, this layered world feels almost intimate. And yet arrival is not arrival, not quite. The wagons still need guiding. The animals still need care. Supper still has to be cooked. Boots still rub. Children still complain. A landscape may look like the end of struggle while daily life continues to insist otherwise. This is one of the quiet tricks of the trail. It teaches you that a destination can appear before it is truly entered and even entered before it is truly understood. There is a small but revealing detail in many emigrant impressions of Oregon. Some describe the first sight of the greener country in deeply emotional language full of gratitude and relief. Others sounded curiously subdued, even dazed, as if their minds could not quite catch up with what their bodies had endured. That feels entirely plausible. After months of walking daily, seeing hardship day, losing weight, counting supplies, and measuring life by camp tasks, it would be difficult to pivot instantly into simple joy. Fatigue puts a gauze over triumph. You watch people respond in different ways. One woman grows quiet at the sight of good timber and keeps blinking more than usual, which is often how adults cry when they do not want to make a ceremony of it. A man begins speaking rapidly about land fences, planting livestock yields, all the future nouns rushing out at once, now that the place seems almost tangible. Children are quicker and more literal. They point out berries, creek, shade, and anything that suggests immediate use or delight. One simply says it looks nicer here, and really that covers a great deal of frontier policy. The wagons move more slowly than anyone's hopes. Roads, if these can still be called roads without blushing, remain uneven. Streams still must be crossed. Rains can still make a mess of everything. Animals that have come this far are tired enough to be irritable, weak, or both. People are tired too, and tired people near the end of a journey can become oddly brittle. Nearness creates its own strain. The long-held vision of Oregon now stands close enough to inspect, which means it can finally disappoint. There is ongoing discussion among historians about how much emigrant expectations of Oregon were shaped by boosterism, selective storytelling and wishful hearing, long before they ever arrived. Some surely expected a near Eden of easy abundance. Others may have been more realistic, knowing that fertile land still required clearing, building, and months of labour before comfort could emerge. What is certain is that reaching the valley did not erase the practical burdens people carried in with them. Hope crossed the trail too, but so did illness, grief, debt, worn-out equipment, and human disagreement. Along the road now you see more signs of settlement. Cabins, fences, fields partly worked, smoke from fixed homes, perhaps a garden stubbornly arranged against a wall, perhaps livestock held in enclosures rather than drifting through open camp routines. These sights can stir envy as much as encouragement. Fixed roofs have become almost mythic in your mind. The sight of one can make you suddenly aware of how long you have been sleeping under cloth and stars. One of the less grand but very real surprises for many arrivals was that Oregon demanded immediate labour from people who had already spent months labouring. Land had to be claimed, shelters built, tools repaired, seed, found animals recovered, supplies restocked, and communities navigated. There was no magical interval of applause and recovery. You did not drift gracefully from the trail into a well-ordered farmstead. You staggered into the next chapter carrying everything the road had left you with. Even so, relief keeps appearing in small sensory gifts. The touch of cooler shade at midday, the sight of thicker grass for animals worn thin by the root, the sound of abundant water, the possibility of fruit, later gardens, later settled meals later. Later becomes a very important word here. It is no longer the abstract later of distant Oregon, but the nearer later of next month, next planting, next winter, next proper roof. As evening settles, camp in greener country feels different from plains camp or mountain camp. The firelight flickers against leaves as well as canvas. Moist air cools the skin more kindly. The smell of supper mixes with rich vegetation and the fresh wet scent that rises after sunset from shaded ground. Frogs may even contribute their opinion from nearby water, which feels almost luxurious after so much wind and wheel noise. The camp sounds like bowed, more held. People talk differently too. The old route behind is measured now against what lies ahead, which claim might be possible, whom they know or hope to find. Whether there is enough money left for seed, whether the livestock will recover, whether the children seem stronger in this air, are mentions orchards they were told about months ago. Instead of sounding like a dream, the word orchard now hangs in the air like a practical possibility. And still beneath all the relief, doubt remains. That is honest. A destination reached at such cost cannot be greeted only with joy. Too much has happened on the road. Too much has been left behind or buried beside it. Some families arrive smaller than when they left. Some marriages arrive strained. Some wagons are half broken. Some bodies will never fully forgive the journey. Green Country does not cancel that. It simply receives it. By the time darkness gathers, you understand the mood settling over camp. It is not celebration exactly, not yet. It is loosening. A slow unwinding of vigilance mixed with the nervousness of beginning again. You sit with your tin cup, warming your hands, listening to water nearby, and the softer movement of leaves overhead, and let the thought form gently. You're close. Truly close now. The long-imagined valley is no longer a story told by merchants and guidebooks. It is around you in scent, sound, and shadow. When you lie down that night, the ground feels no softer than usual, and your body is no less tired, but something in the mind has shifted. Not peace, not completely, but room for peace. The road that has ruled every waking hour is beginning to loosen its grip. Tomorrow there will still be walking, still choices, still work. Yet the country itself now seems to murmur that the end of the trail, or at least the end of this version of it, is near. And after so many miles of dust, mud, hunger, and strain, that murmur is enough to let you close your eyes with something almost like gratitude. And then you arrive, which sounds as though it should feel louder than it does. Not silent exactly. There are still wagon wheels, still oxen breathing, still children asking whether this is finally it, still adults answering in tones that try to sound firmer than they feel. But the great imagined moment of arrival does not come with trumpets. It comes with tired bodies, worn harness smoke in your clothes, and the strange realization that after months of longing for the end of the trail, you are not entirely sure what to do with the fact that the trail is no longer the only thing in front of you. The Oregon country that drew people west was never just one spot, one gate, one signpost announcing success. It was a region of valleys, claims, settlements, missions, scattered cabins, and opportunities that looked different depending on where you stood, whom you knew, and what strength you had left when you got there. Reaching Oregon did not mean stepping directly into a neat farmhouse with a pie cooling on the sill and a fence already built by Providence. It meant arriving in a place where the next set of problems had been patiently waiting. That is one of the great facts of overland migration that tends to get flattened in retelling. The journey west was not over in any meaningful sense when the walking stopped. Emigrants still needed shelter, land supplies, tools, seed, healthy animals, and the endurance to begin building after months of depletion. Arrival, in other words, was less a finish line than a transfer of burden. The road ended. The work did not. You see it immediately in the way people look around. Not with simple delight, though delight flickers. With appraisal. There is timber there, water there. Better grazing, perhaps beyond that rise. A cabin already standing over there if one has relatives, money, or luck. A patch of ground that might someday become a field. The eye that has learned to judge road weather and camp now turns toward judging settlement. Could we live here? Could we build here? Could the oxen recover here? Could the children? The air smells richer than the long trail behind. Wet soil, wood smoke from fixed homes, cut grass, perhaps the faint sweet smell of livestock kept in more permanent enclosures. Even that difference can stir the heart unexpectedly. A house has a smell distinct from a wagon camp. So does a field worked for seasons instead of passed through for one tired night. You breathe it in and feel the ache of recognition for a settled life you have not had in months. Yet not everyone arrives to comfort. Some find relatives, some find established communities, some find little more than a claim to pursue, and a patch of ground not yet transformed into anything forgiving. A family may reach the valley and discover that the true labour, the rooted labour, begins immediately. Trees must be felled, ground must be cleared, temporary shelter must become less temporary before the rains or colds set in. Food still has to be found while crops remain only a plan. One curious detail preserved in settlers' recollections is how underwhelming some first shelters could be after such enormous hopes. Lean-tos, rough cabins with dirt floors, shared quarters, half-finished walls, roofs that needed persuading. After the wagon, even a crude structure could feel wonderful. After the dream of Oregon, the same crude structure could feel alarmingly modest. Human beings are capable of gratitude and disappointment at the same time. The trail merely sharpens the talent. You watch one family stand beside the place that will be theirs for now, a cabin so rough it seems held together by determination and wet wood. The mother says it is good to have a roof. The father says it will do until something better can be built. A child asks where the other room is. No one answers immediately. That pause says more than any speech on Frontier Grit. There is also the question of who gets to claim what and under what terms. Land in Oregon did indeed attract settlers with the promise of opportunity, and later federal land laws encourage migration further. But on the ground, access to good land depended on timing, local knowledge connections, labour capacity, and the broader colonial reality that these settlements spread through indigenous homelands already inhabited and used long before emigrants arrived. That truth does not vanish simply because a wagon train is exhausted. Settlement is not innocent because it is difficult. Writers and researchers have long examined whether emigrants felt triumph most strongly upon arrival, or relief or numbness or even disorientation. The evidence points in several directions at once. Some accounts glow with gratitude, others sound strangely flat, as if the writers were too spent to feel anything all at once. Some arrivals seem to have wept, others appear to have moved directly into chopping wood and finding supper. The body can only host so much emotion when it is also trying to recover from a continent. There are reunions sometimes, a cousin found, a friend arrived earlier, a wagon train split and then partially rejoined in altered circumstances. The sight of a known face in a fixed doorway can undo a person faster than months of hardship. Familiarity is powerful after prolonged strain. A voice from home or from the part of the country that now counts as home may make all the hard composure of the trail go soft around the edges. Supplies remain a pressing concern. You do not stop needing flour merely because the valley is fertile in theory. Fields do not harvest themselves the moment you lay eyes on them. Livestock need rest and feed. Wagons need unloading, sorting, perhaps dismantling for lumber or storage. Clothing needs mending. Bodies need mending too. Some people arrive stronger than expected. Others are all but poured off the trail into settlement, moving with the hollowed-out caution of those who have spent too long using tomorrow's strength in advance. A small but telling trail-to-settlement detail appears often enough to be trusted. Many arrivals slept astonishingly hard, once under a more stable roof, even a poor one. Not because all worry vanished, but because the body finally sensed wall stillness and the absence of tomorrow's forced march. Imagine lying down and knowing the bed, however rough, will not move west in the morning. That alone might feel like luxury enough to make a person cry into a pillow stuffed with straw. Of course, some expectations crack on contact. Oregon is not uniformly easy. Weather can be wet work, unending isolation, still very real. Neighbours may be near or not near enough. Supplies may cost more than hoped. Promised opportunities may already have been claimed by earlier arrivals, or may require more labour than a weakened family can easily supply. A place can be promising and difficult at once. In fact, frontier places almost insist upon it. Children often adapt fastest. They spot creeks climbing trees' corners to claim patches of earth that might become play again instead of mere root. They ask when they can stop sleeping near the wagon. They notice chickens before adults notice roofing problems. Their sense of arrival can be wonderfully literal. Is there milk? Is there shade? Is there a place where we are staying? If yes, then perhaps this is enough for today. Adults, being less wise in some respects, immediately begin worrying about next month. By evening, the first settled supper tastes different. Perhaps not richer, perhaps not finer, but steadier. Food eaten beside a cabin wall or under a roof or near a yard instead of a temporary camp carries another feeling with it. Continuation. The fire is not merely tonight's fire. It may be tomorrow's too in the same place. Smoke rises and does not have to be left behind by dawn. That difference settles deep. You sit and listen to the sounds of arrival. Not the grand sounds of victory, but the ordinary ones. A hammer beginning work on a wall, a wagon being unloaded, someone calling for a bucket, a cow lowing from an enclosure, a child laughing because there is a stump to climb, a woman folding the same blanket she has folded for months, except now she places it inside an actual structure. The gestures are almost unbearably modest. That is what makes them moving. As darkness gathers, you may feel something unexpected. Not joy exactly, though joy flickers, not sadness only, though sadness for what was lost surely remains. Perhaps what you feel most is aftermath. The trail is suddenly behind you in a way that makes it more vivid, not less. Graves rivers, dust rain mountains, beans, blisters, smoke, all of it seems to crowd closer once the walking stops. Motion had been keeping memory busy. Stillness lets it enter the room. So you lie down at last in Oregon and the strange truth of arrival settles around you. You made it here, yes, but you did not arrive untouched, and the place itself is not waiting to reward you without further labour. Still the wheels are quiet. The road is no longer calling for morning movement, and after all those months of walking daily beside a wagon, that quiet can feel like the most extraordinary thing in the world. When the walking finally stops ruling every hour, you begin to understand what it has done to you. Not in a grand speech-worthy way, though. People later will certainly attempt those. No, the truth arrives more quietly, in the way your body still wakes before dawn expecting fire smoke and oxen, in the way you look at a road and automatically judge mud, grade and water, in the way a meal under a fixed roof feels almost suspiciously luxurious. The Oregon Trail does not end neatly at arrival, because the trail has already moved inside the people who walked it. You sit with that realization in the calmer moments, perhaps on a rough stool outside a cabin, perhaps on a log, perhaps against a wagon that has at last been unloaded enough to seem less like destiny and more like tired wood on wheels. Around you, the new life is beginning in earnest. Timber is cut, claims are discussed, livestock are counted, coaxed, worried over. Tools are unpacked and sorted. The ordinary frontier future starts making its demands. Yet alongside that future walks the memory of the road, and it is not content to stay politely in the background. A solid historical point belongs here. The Oregon Trail became one of the defining stories of 19th century American westward migration, and later generations often turned it into legend, emphasizing bravery, endurance, and opportunity, while smoothing over the repetitive labour's grief, dependence, and bodily hardship that filled most actual days. That smoothing is almost inevitable. People tell stories to make experience bearable, and legends prefer peaks to long trudges. But if you walk daily beside a wagon, what you remember first may not be the legend at all. It may be the feel of your shoes, the smell of bacon smoke, the sound of wheels in mud, the way evening light looked on a line of tired oxen. This is what walking west truly meant. It changed scale. A continent became measurable in feet, not speeches. A day became measurable in watershade distance to camp and whether the beans burned. The body learned the country long before the mind turned it into memory. You could not cross such a route without your muscles, skin and senses recording it. Dust taught one lesson, rain another, mountains another still. Even now rattled or settling, the body keeps reciting what it knows. There is something else the walking altered too. Family roles, relationships, temperaments. People who shared a house back east had to share a trial out here, and trials are revealing. The generous became more beloved. The selfish became more obvious. Competence glowed. Boasting dimmed. Children learned practical habits early. Women's labour showed itself as the framework of daily survival. Men learned that authority meant very little without endurance, restraint and a good team. The road was a merciless editor of illusion. A quieter and somewhat surprising detail from emigrant recollections is how often former travellers remembered not just hardship but rhythm, the regularity of camp chores, the line of wagons at dawn, the ritual of coffee, the nightly circling in of the moving village. People could miss what had exhausted them. That seems contradictory only if you forget how human beings work. Repetition, even hard repetition, can become a form of belonging. Once the trail ends, part of the mind keeps listening for its old pattern. There is still disagreement among historians over how far the popular image of the Oregon Trail was shaped more by later nostalgia than by the actual voices of emigrants themselves. Some personal accounts are indeed sober, practical, and stripped of romance. Others already contain the seeds of myth, framing survival as providential, heroic, or redemptive. Memory begins editing almost at once. Perhaps that is unavoidable. Yet if you attend to the quieter details preserved in diaries and letters, another truth emerges beside the myth. The trail was not only a stage for courage, it was an education in chores, weather, appetite loss and patience. Walking daily matters, especially in that education. Riding suggests passivity, even if unfairly. Walking means your body meets the land without much mediation. You feel every rut through your ankles, every change in soil underfoot, every slope in your calves, every mile there in the tender logic of your feet. Walking places you at the level of grass, mudstones, wheel hubs, children's questions, and the smell of animals. It is less glamorous than sitting in a wagon, and much truer to how many emigrants actually experience the road. You do not glide west. You accompany yourself wet step by unsteady step. And that walking changed what people later noticed in the world. Water became sacred in a practical sense. Shade became treasure. Sound carried meaning differently. A coughing camp, a loose chain, a distant river, the call to yoke up, repeated attention turned into knowledge. Traveller fresh from town might see scenery. A traveller seasoned by the trail saw forage footing clouds current risk, and where the children were relative to the wheels. Beauty remained certainly, but it lived beside usefulness. One lesser known thread in the afterlife of the trail is how many material traces vanished while stories remained. Graves weathered, wagon ruts softened, wooden markers split, campsites faded back into grass, objects left behind rotted or were taken. What endured most strongly was memory carried in people, families, communities, and later national storytelling. That is worth pausing over. The land forgets in one way while people remember in another. And people rarely remember only facts. They remember sensations, rituals, losses, jokes, stubbornness, one impossible river, one miraculous cup of coffee. You can see already how the story will be told later around winter fires, or to grandchildren who cannot imagine such distances walked with such limited means. Some parts will grow larger, some will be softened. A dangerous crossing might become almost comic in hindsight. A hunger stretch may be shortened in the telling. A grave by the road may be mentioned briefly or not at all, depending on who survived to speak. This is not dishonesty so much as human curation. Everyone arranges their past a little before handing it on. Still beneath whatever legend forms, the daily truth remains. Life on the Oregon Trail was not one continuous climax. It was repetition. Walking, cooking, mending, waiting, carrying. Soothing, watching. Fording, rationing, burying, hoping. It was social history in its rawest form. Ordinary people turning a continental migration into a string of domestic acts performed under extraordinary pressure. That is what makes the story so compelling. Not simply the scale of the map, but the smallness of the daily tasks that carried people across it. And perhaps that is why the trail still haunts the imagination. It compresses so much of human life into a moving world. Work and desire, family and conflict, faith and fear, hunger and humour, landscape and body, beginning and ending. You can tell the story as conquest if you want, and many did. You can tell it as endurance, and that is closer. But if you really want to know what life was like while walking daily in the 1800s on the Oregon Trail, you must tell it through feet, kettles, wheel, grease, children, women's, labour, men's, worry, oxen's, patience, sickness, mud dust, and the long, slow discipline of continuing. Now the pace eases. The road behind you begins to blur at the edges, not because it mattered less, but because the mind at last can let go of gripping every mile. Evening settles softly over the valley. The air is gentle, carrying the scent of grass, wood smoke, and cooling earth. You sit with your hands quiet in your lap, no rope to hold, no wheel to brace, no camp to make before dark. Somewhere nearby, water moves in a calm, steady murmur. A cow shifts in its pen. A child no longer needing to walk another mile today gives one last sleepy question and then falls silent. You breathe in and out. The trail is still within you, but it is farther off now, like thunder retreating over hills. The dust has settled. The fires have burned low. The oxen are unyoked in memory and in the fading light. One by one the hardest sounds drift away. No more grinding wheels, no more urgent calls at a riverbank, no more counting the sacks by firelight and wondering if they will last. Only the softer sounds remain, brachychus, water, a distant lowing, the quiet rustle of blankets being spread in a place that will still be here in the morning. You let the vastness of it all soften. The plains, the rivers, the mountains, the graves, the camps, the smoky suppers, the sore feet, the long, patient days of walking, they no longer press against you. They float further and further back, becoming part of a dim lantern glow in the mind. You've carried them far enough. Tonight you can set them down. The stars above are steady and mild. The earth beneath you feels cool and safe. The story that began in mud beside a Missouri river ends here in stillness, in breath, in the hush after effort. And as the night grows deeper, even Oregon itself begins to fade into shadow, softened by distance, by memory, by rest. You are warm, you are quiet, you are no longer walking. The road is asleep now, and you can be too. Sweet dream. Dreams